These are what we received so far. These are from your thing.
And thanks for the forwarding the comments from planning commission. They were really interesting.
E1, yeah, okay. Yep.
I felt like I was in a meeting with them with all the different voices that they have. It was a very specific meeting, or like voice, but there was no meeting. I just saw comments. No.
Okay. So it is 10 o'clock. Are we all ready to go? Okay. Okay, I'm going to call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for August 11th, 2022. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. And Commissioner Sterrett, would you lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our calendar session. Is there anything to add to the joint calendar?
Chair, I would assume that all the commissioners got the invitation to attend the McMinnville Farmers Market specifically today. And it came midweek, so I don't know that it had gotten on the schedule, but just, I know I'll be going by, and I don't know if other commissioners, just so that we can make note of that.
Great.
Yes,
And then
I'll
I
be there
added the Oregon International Air Show is next weekend.
Yes.
And then we have a couple of meetings that I added. You should have been forwarded those. But then also September 7th, I've added a discussion regarding the McMinnville Fire District and potential plan for a new district between the city of McMinnville and McMinnville Rural. So we'll be talking about that September 7th.
Great. I'm talking with Councilor Garvin tomorrow
Okay.
about it. He's just doing a briefing, or sorry, Monday, whatever.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I also, the Willamette Workforce Partnership has
Reconnect.
whatever. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. That, and I believe it's Thursday morning is the section that they would like commissioners to attend. So I will be at that. I'm not sure if you want to, it's a tight
Yeah,
timeline, but
I think it starts at 8,
yeah,
8:30.
yeah. And
So- I don't remember if I sent that one over. I think I did. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's at Chemeketa and Salem. Is that right?
yes,
Okay.
the one that's downtown, the Center for Business and Innovation.
And also former Sheriff Crabtree's memorial services tomorrow.
Mhm.
So, and that's at 10 a.m. I
Yeah.
think that was sent over. Did I send that? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see.
And then the other item, just a reminder, on Thursday, the 18th, that evening, we have a local government dinner with the cities.
Yep. Yes, thank you.
Okay, anything further for the calendar?
Chair.
Okay, item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. It looks like, and we did receive substantial written public comment that came in prior to today's meeting, so I want to acknowledge that. And we have a couple of public comment in person, but if you are online attending and you have public comment for anything that is not on the agenda, please raise your virtual hand and we will get to you in a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to call up Tammy Story. Welcome. And just for the record, if you could state your name and address, we'd appreciate it.
My name is Tammy Story. I live at 9420 Laughter Lane in Amity, Oregon. I just have a few, thank you all for letting me speak this morning. I'm here representing AFSCME and just wanted to make some comments about the House Bill 4004. Our members are wondering where that is and where it stands. I'm just going to read some comments. These aren't my personal comments, just
Sure. And Tammy, could you pull the microphone a little bit closer to you?
just bend over.
You can just pull it towards you. I
Okay.
think that'll just make sure that people who are listening. can
Yeah.
hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So while people were at home getting paid extra money on unemployment, county employees came to work every day without hazard pay while being in the middle of a pandemic and subjected to exposure. Some employees contracted COVID and exposed their families, yet even today still has received nothing for their loyalty. And these are some of the comments you received. I'm just going to read just a little. This money would mean a lot to my family and I. For us, this was a way for government to thank us for constant risks we took exposing ourselves to the pandemic in order to provide excellent service to the community. Throughout this pandemic, we have carried a heavy responsibility to continue to serve our community and put our family at risk as well. I viewed this as a well-deserved thank you to take some time off and recharge. So many of us have become so stressed that we've left the field, and those of us remaining have had to fill the gaps, shoulder the burden, and the rampant industry burnout. So many of us and our families have also gotten sick with COVID and have fallen behind. Please show your appreciation for us and give us an opportunity to pay some bills, take a vacation, afford a new car, replace a water heater. Also, that the county can use well-needed money to provide retention bonuses and benefits to retain employees to ease the stress on us. I will gladly continue to serve the community as public service. It's an important part of my core values, and we desperately need a boost in morale. This is of no cost to the county and would be an easy way to show your appreciation to us. Yeah, 2 minutes, right? As a longtime employee of Yamhill County, this is separate. I am asking you to please accept the monies given to you to support our county employees and help us continue to help others. We're struggling with morale and staffing problems and with being overworked and underappreciated. The BOC could take immediate action with this money, and it's part of the problem here at the county needs to be corrected. Please do what's right and take care of the people that are taking care of the people. I think that's the gist of what I got to read.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.
And we had also, we saw public comment as well from some of your fellow staffers in YCA.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Michelle Carrillo. And Michelle, if you could state your name and address for the record, we appreciate it.
My name is Michelle Carrillo. And what else did you need?
Address.
28625 Andy Ricks Road in Grand Ron.
Great. And I apologize for saying your last name incorrectly.
That's
Carrillo.
I've heard it all kinds of different ways. That's fine. So I'm here also representing YCA Local 1422, as well as AFSCME Council 75. I'm the YCA Vice President. And it seems an agreement is pending from the BOC on a plan to disperse the funds before voting to accept the money. Behavioral staff are nervous because the county is swiftly running out of time to accept and distribute these funds. Tammy Story has already read a few comments from behavioral staff who are directly affected by this bill. We urge the BOC to take these comments into consideration.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any virtual hands up in the audience? No? Looks like we have one. Welcome. I'm not sure if that's your first or last name, but if you could identify yourself for public comment and provide your address, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, my name is Leah Peckler, and I am a resident of Yamhill County. I live at 788 Adams Street in Lafayette.
Oh, okay. So your audio just came on. Could you repeat that real quick?
Oh, so sorry. I don't do a lot of Zoom meetings, so sorry about the technical. My name is Leah Peckler, and I live at 788 Adams Street in Lafayette, Oregon.
Okay, you said Leah Peckler?
Yes.
Okay, welcome, Leah. And go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for creating some space for this public forum and comments. I'm here on behalf of Measure 109. So I am a registered nurse and I work in.
Sorry, I want to interrupt you really quick because we're getting to the public hearing for that next. And so that's where we would add your testimony for Measure 109.
Oh, so sorry. I'll hold off until then.
Okay, that's okay. Well, I'll make sure to call on you when we get there. It'll just be a couple minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so if there's no other public comment for anything other than an agenda item, we will move on to item E, which is our public hearing. This is a public hearing to receive public comments regarding psilocybin service centers in unincorporated Yamhill County. And I think I want to, well, let's do this. Let's take public comment for anyone that is not in favor of placing something on the ballot, whether it's an outright ban or it's a 2-year moratorium. So if that
And Chair,
includes,
I just want to note that the public, it says a public hearing to receive public comments regarding psilocybin service centers in unincorporated Yamhill County. So there's not necessarily sides to the hearing itself, if that makes sense.
sure,
I don't know if we.
I'm just talking about
for
for organization
Yeah.
purposes, but so actually I have a handful of those in front of me. So why don't I call up Jason Lampman first?
I think it's a little confusing too, like the way that that's written, like I didn't understand. Those
Yeah.
in favor of not having a ban? Or-
Yeah, we're just, never mind. We'll just call up everybody. I was trying to organize in my mind and it's not working.
Yeah,
So
just to
Okay.
kind of clarify, because I know we're used to doing more quasi judicial
Yeah.
land use hearings where you have opponents and proponents for the applications. In this case, this is a general public hearing,
Yep.
so you can organize it however you want to conduct the meeting, or you could just go through the list and collect the comments and go from there.
Okay, well, for an easier process, we'll just go through the list. So, okay, Jason, for the record, if you could state your name and address.
My name is Jason Lampman. I live at 17175 Southwest Oldsville Road. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. This is a new area. New things are scary, and I understand that, and I understand how hard your job is. But to go against my vote and Yamhill County's vote, it does not seem right to me. I've been trying so hard to bring light, facts, and data about this, all on from the website, hundreds of pages that I've read. In the past, we've had people that were scared of cannabis, and you think it's controversial now? I bet it was way more controversial back in the 90s. Even then, they honored the vote of the people in this exact commission. I found file number 66, page 360, ordinance number 666. The board makes the following findings. Section A, ordinance number 594 prohibits the use of marijuana in a Yamhill County. Section B, on November 3rd, 1998, the voters of Oregon approved ballot number 67, the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. In section 3, the ordinance recognizes state law preempts the ordinance honoring the voters of Oregon, because that's what representatives do. And that was 1999, 23 years ago. I'm sure that was a tough decision then too. Psilocybin service helps people. We have the chance and obligation to honor the voters again here today. It cures anxiety, depression, addiction, and there's no standard for addiction therapy, or we haven't found it yet. There's 12-step behavioral therapy. We're trying. We don't wait for a standardized metric when the genuine intention is to help people. We don't want to waste time. We don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. The TPM restrictions are being drafted already. Let's embrace that. Use your power to move forward, not restrict and go against the voters. All that's going to do is prevent small businesses and farmers like me from getting started. Let's get it right. You guys are awesome at doing this. I've read and listened to so many things. Nobody can do this better than you, all of you. I've seen it done. I believe in you. So getting it right isn't running in fear or delaying the inevitable, throwing a Hail Mary pass back to a vote for the citizens in hope of a different result. Getting it right is addressing apprehensions and having solid plans in place for everyone's concerns. I mean, and for everyone here, like what better platform to run an election on than we always honor the voters and form rules and restrictions that ensure successful implementation of a new service. That's what I want to hear my representatives say, no matter what the issue is. So, sorry. People need help. I need your help. I never ask for help. I don't take state or federal aid ever. I don't ask for handouts. I work 8 to 10 hours every single day, 7 days a week. That's fine. I'm living the American dream and I love it. I can get up earlier and I can work later. That's a possibility. But I can't succeed or compete against big business if my vote doesn't count, you know? And when I do succeed, if I vote and it does win and I get the rug pulled out from underneath me, I'll never get ahead. I need your help. Many people need this, please. Let's make a plan that supports small business farmers like me, the citizens, and all of you to feel comfortable. By deciding to focus on the land use and the TPM restrictions that you talked about in the last meetings. I'm told time and time again, vote, show up and talk to your representatives. I've been here for a month every time that I can. Every county that puts a ban on has said, we're honoring our voters. Let's be consistent with that here today, you know? So, you know, I'm gonna have to, you know, what I tell my kids, your vote counts if it's in line with the commissioners, or my vote counts because of what you guys say at the end of every email that I get back from you guys. It says Yamhill County works for you, me being me. So I hope that your decision today reflects that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
And
One
Jason, we've had an
complaint, though.
opportunity to ask you questions in the past, but I don't know.
I'm sorry.
There are a lot of
I'm
other
available for
people,
questions.
so
Oh, I was just gonna
perhaps
say,
if it's later.
I'm gonna file my complaint that you didn't bring your little cute baby with you. So.
Well, that was kind of like I just didn't know the meeting was happening.
No,
I
that
should have
was,
brought him back.
that was manipulative because you know all of us just were focusing on that baby.
Can
We
I
had
bring
been
him here
looking
for
at
nap
kitten
time?
photos, so-
Because it worked really well. Did you see he fell
He just
asleep?
fell asleep.
That was amazing.
Yeah, we
Most
do
people
that to
fall asleep
people.
in our meetings.
So we won't be this wonderfully and happy at our land use hearing, just, I swear.
Great.
Okay.
Any questions for Jason?
No.
No, not at this point. I feel like you've shared with us, I think, a lot of the nuance
Yeah.
of
Okay.
the issues, but it may come up, but there's a lot of other people, so I want to make sure.
All
I
right.
hear from
Thank
them.
you so much.
Yeah, and I
Thank you,
appreciate
Jason.
appreciate all the research you put into it
Yeah.
too. Okay, I'm going to call forward Josh Longoria. Welcome, Josh.
I'm gonna take this off. Doesn't matter.
I think you're fine. Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. And just for the record, if you could state your name and address.
Sorry, Josh Longoria, 1743 Tamarack Street, McMinnville, Oregon. I'm here as a small business owner, brick and mortar in this town. And I'm just asking today that you guys honor 109 and don't send it back to the voters. It's already been voted on. I know there was a I can't think of the word, a clause or an amendment addendum in there that said, you know, there's an opt-out for a county if you see fit. The voters here voted for it. I think that was for counties that were highly against it. So I'm just asking to not have a revote. For me personally, I've been struggling with migraines for quite a while. I was pretty clear for a couple of years, and then this year it started back up again. And I've got pockets full of medication that I have to take every day. for migraines, Topamax and naratriptan and other triptans, which constrict the blood. I'm a big guy, I could be in better shape, but restricting blood vessels doesn't feel great, and it's probably not the best thing for me in the long run. But going to work with a migraine is impossible. So I have a business partner, and trying to run that business alone is hard. I've tried to do it myself. I definitely lean on him and he leans on me. So me not being there is pretty tough. And my doctor and I have talked about psilocybin therapy, and it sounds pretty promising. I've done quite a bit of research. I know that they were actually using LSD in Holland, and they were taking the psychoactive chemicals out of LSD and giving it to people, and it was working really well. And they were also testing psilocybin therapy, and it seemed to be working really well for people. They weren't getting loaded, as the term would be, or high from it, but that it was actually really effective. So I've been looking forward to this, but not having somewhere close by would be tough. Having to go to Portland or anywhere else and be away for a couple of days puts me back in that position where I'm away from work and not able to open my business today. I mean, we open at 10, my business partners are covering it. Usually I open and he closes, but I wanted to make sure that I was here to give this testimony. So having somewhere safe to be able to do that is really what I'm here for. And I just hope that we don't send this back to the voters. I think the voters would vote the same way and we'd probably be okay, but we already voted. So I think that we got it right the first time, and just ask that you honor that.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
your time,
Josh.
guys.
Thank you.
Any
Any
good?
questions for Josh?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Yeah.
Super
Appreciate you
helpful.
coming.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
Okay. I'm going to go to Daniel Schumann. I believe that's right. You could state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Daniel Schumann. I am a recent college grad from Linfield College. I studied psychology in the 4 years that I went there, along with playing football and being a part of a bunch of other active programs. I'm also here to talk, address 644 Southeast Jack Avenue, McMinnville, Oregon.
Thank you.
I'm also here to talk about Measure 109. I would like to hopefully be a facilitator. I understand that I don't technically have the credentials to validate myself as a facilitator, but I would like to. I think this is something new. I think that 4 years of college, with good grades, passing, getting a degree in that subject should be enough to validate myself as a facilitator, especially since it's something where we're looking for non-directive facilitation. So as a non-directive facilitator, I would be there to guide the patient, to be there, in support of them. I'm not going to be telling them what to do. I'm not going to be prescribing them medications. I just want to be there, as I think that is what is most helpful for this type of therapies. We've seen with and with what I've studied, addiction, PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, but especially addiction and PTSD, as Mr. Lampton was saying, addiction is very broad. It's not really just based on substances. It can be ideas, it can be attitudes, it can be people. And PTSD, it's not just with veterans. We've seen with people who are abused most of their life in early childhood, carrying on things much later in life that debilitate them from working and living actual lives. So psilocybin treatment, specifically in small doses, because people's fear around psilocybin tends to be what happens when you take a lot or incorrectly or not in the right environment, or you don't have a guide with you. But in small doses, I believe it is the perfect pharmaceutical solution to the pills and pharmaceutical aids we're giving to patients nowadays for these same problems. Getting a patient's brain chemically changed forever to have to be supported with these drugs that basically make them a functioning zombie isn't a fulfilling life, but psilocybin therapy can give them fulfilling lives. And please don't send it back to the voters. I think they did a good job the first time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Dana.
Okay, Leah, if you are still online, we are ready for your testimony. Thank you for waiting. And again, if you could state your name and address for the record.
Sorry, I think I was continuing to mute. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Leah Peckler, and I'm at 788 Adams Street in Lafayette, Oregon. So again, thank you for holding some space for all of us today. I am here on behalf of Measure 109. My ask is that we do not send this vote back to the public, as we have already voted in favor. I am a registered nurse and I work in palliative care, which is a type of care that specializes for patients dealing with advanced illness. A lot of these patients are dealing with anxiety, depression, and very significant existential distress with regards to facing their terminal illness and their mortality. Now, these patients who are suffering from this distress have an increase in pain or reduction in their ability to cope with their illness, and that really impacts their ability to spend quality time with their loved ones in their final weeks and months of life. There is a lot of strong preliminary evidence to suggest that psilocybin-guided therapy in this patient population reduces these symptoms of anxiety, of depression, and of existential distress. In addition to that patient population, as some of the other community members have noted, the benefits for PTSD, major depressive disorder, and substance use disorder, among many, many others, it is really shown to be beneficial for these patients under, again, guided and therapeutic therapy sessions to have an overall reduction in those symptoms, fewer exacerbations, and reduced need for pharmaceuticals, which cause their own harmful side effects for these patients. I believe that putting this vote back to the public is just going to take a step back when really we should be moving forward. The need for mental health services and outreach is growing, and we just are not meeting that demand. And so I think restricting this therapy or limiting access to this therapy is really doing a disservice to many members of the community who may seek alternative types of treatment when conventional treatment has failed them or has not worked for them in the past. So again, I'm very much in favor. I think we can be a leader in our community, in our state, to show that we support this and that we support patients who are seeking alternative forms of treatment under guided and therapeutic regulations to obtain access to this therapy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah,
Thank
Leah.
you.
Feels like it brings a very specific
Mhm.
perspective that I haven't really thought about.
Mhm. Okay, looks like we'll go to Sam Chapman. If you could unmute.
Right. Can you hear me okay, commissioners?
Yes, we can. And just for the record, state your name and address, please.
Yep, you bet. My name is Sam Chapman. I live at 8110 Southeast Ramona Street in Portland, Oregon. And thank you for giving me the time to testify today. I am currently serving as the executive director of the Healing Advocacy Fund. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that is solely focused on providing resources and education on all things Measure 109, especially right now throughout the implementation rulemaking process and assisting local governments such as yourselves in providing information to a lot of the questions and concerns that you may have. I'd be happy to be available for questions afterwards, and I've actually had some of my staff compile some responses to questions that you've had at former meetings, and that's actually what I would like to spend my time on today. I'd be happy to provide additional resources and information on general overviews via email as well. So the first item is regarding safety concerns about people leaving service centers. The first thing I want to say is that the public health and safety are at the core of this program's regulatory development. While this is not a strictly medical model, and intentionally so, Clients opting to use psilocybin will go through a 4-step process to ensure that they are a good fit to use these services. The first is assessment. This is where a theoretical participant will submit a health and background information to a facilitator that will do a couple of things. One, it will identify someone's personal health history and background. Whether they have a health history of depression or if they're currently on medications, et cetera. This, among other pieces of information, really allows a theoretical participant to get matched with the right facilitator. There's going to be a whole host of facilitators with different backgrounds, as you've actually heard from some folks today, from folks who have training in psychology to folks that specifically want to work with end-of-life communities. Each person seeking these services is going to have their own needs. And we are confident that there's going to be a large variety of facilitators with different backgrounds that are set up to meet those needs. The second step of this process is intention setting. This is where you will actually sit down with a facilitator, really get to know the process and get to know them. The relationship between a participant and a facilitator is one of the pillars of having a successful session, really feeling comfortable, not only in the environment in which you are in, but with the person that is there for your general guidance as well. The third step is actually the administration itself. This will take place at a licensed service center under the constant supervision of a facilitator. And last but not least is the integration, which is an option where someone could come back a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks after an administration session and really unpack the experience with the facilitator to better understand the positive benefits that can occur in integrating those experiences long term. The second aspect that I wanted to highlight is, what are these service centers going to look like? That's probably one of the most common questions we get right now from different commissioners and cities. And there will be a general variety and a spectrum of service centers. On one end, I do think we will see a couple of retreat style service centers. This is where not only psilocybin services may be available, but other wellness modalities may be available as well, from massage to acupuncture, et cetera. I do not anticipate there being more than a small handful, if more than 3 in the first few years of this program. The capital that it takes to launch an endeavor like that is not small. And on top of the overhead it takes to get it moving. They will happen, but there will be very few of them out of the gate in this program. On the other end of the spectrum, you will have medical facilities adopting psilocybin into their toolkit. These could be existing treatment facilities. These could be hospitals. These could be hospice and palliative care environments as well. White light, stethoscope, lab coat. There's going to be a lot of folks that are already living in these environments, and they need to be met where they are at. And that is why we believe that we'll start to see these in those types of environments too. Last but not least is the most common environment that we're going to see these services take place in, which is a therapist-like office. There's not going to be any crazy bells and whistles. It's going to be a comfortable environment. It's going to be, an office type setting. And it's really going to focus on, again, a comfortable environment and the relationship between the facilitator and the participant itself. And the last item on the safety concerns I want to highlight is that the OHA has taken on the psilocybin program under the lens of public health. And this is to allow for the individual and community safety to be prioritized throughout the oversight of the program. So the agency has remained cautious and practical in its rules thus far, and we anticipate this to continue. I think it's worth noting that the Psilocybin Advisory Board, whose final recommendations have been submitted, are now in the process of being translated into final draft rules by the agency, recommends that the clients be required to arrange for transportation after their administration session. This will be a requirement of the safety plan that each individual participant will have to have prior to moving forward into administration session. Per the text of the statute, the facilitator will also need to sign off on the completion of this session, indicating that the client is no longer experiencing the effects of psilocybin and therefore is safe to leave the premises. So I want to move on to the second concern. I know I'm taking up a lot of time. I'm going to try and move a little bit quicker here. which is specifically related to how this all looks from a land use perspective. And the way we anticipate local governments handling service centers is by designating them under a professional services type of zoning code. Some will offer overnight stays and food, but again, the majority of these will be much more like a therapist's office where sessions will last approximately 4 to 6 hours. These are considerations for your planners to take into account in the development of local use permits, and the Healing Advocacy Fund is happy to engage with those planners should they be curious what other cities and counties are already moving forward on. I can say that approximately 17 out of the 20 most populated cities in the state are actually moving forward with this program, and many of them have already established stakeholder tables and are in the process of developing TPMs. I'd be happy to connect you with those planners as well, should that be of service. Moving on to timelines and rulemaking. This is certainly something that we have heard from a lot of different localities, understandably, about the fact that the rulemaking process does not ideally match up with the local government's timelines as it relates to making a decision for opting out. I do want to point out that in early 2021, the Oregon Health Authority offered several times an opportunity for both cities and counties to weigh in on which rules should be expedited for the benefit of all stakeholders. Local governments, through the League of Cities and the Association of Counties, did not weigh in at that point. And this is one of the reasons that the service center rules were not expedited in the first half of the rules that have already been codified in the process. So I wanted to provide some background on that. As I mentioned earlier, the final set of draft rules will be available in just a few weeks. From there, the rulemaking process with public input and feedback will roll out, and local governments will continue to have the opportunity to review and weigh in on those rules in the coming months as they develop their own regulations. And last but not least, a couple of additional details regarding the land use compatibility statement and timelines, et cetera. I think, as folks know, in January 2023, the Oregon Health Authority will open the application process for psilocybin businesses to apply for licensure. This is a multi-step process, including a local land use compatibility statement approval, which will need to be included in the application packet. The OHA will be providing this LUX template for local governments this fall, and local planning departments will have 21 days to respond to a LUX request. The Oregon Health Authority anticipates the application process taking 60 to 90 days from the start of the application. This means that most of the prepared businesses will likely not open their doors for services until the fall or winter of 2023. There are so many additional aspects above and beyond rules and licensure, as you might imagine, that these businesses are going to need, from identifying compliant property to build out, to hiring staff and raising money to doors open. This is not going to be doors open on January 2nd by any means. And so from the perspective of a local government, you have time to develop your time, place, and manner regulations. And I heavily encourage you to work with the community members in the county that are seeking to open businesses. I'm sure they have far more details of input on what their businesses might look like than I can, and I encourage you to work with them in this process. The final thing I'll say, and then I'll yield for any questions should there be any. The one other note is that businesses wanting to manufacture psilocybin and provide psilocybin services will have to be licensed to operate both facilities by the Oregon Health Authority. The other licenses that will be available in January that are not under local purview include training programs, which is a certification by the Oregon Health Authority, and testing labs. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Sam. And just for clarification, because this has come up in our discussions before, the licensure for manufacturing and having a service center, are they linked? Are they separate? Does one depend on the other? That was sort of unclear when we were talking about this.
Yeah, great question. Both is the answer. They can be linked. You can do a vertical integration. If you wanted to run a service center and have a production facility, you could do so. And I do think that a handful of service centers will be looking to do that, simply because it does not take nearly as much to produce psilocybin as it does cannabis. Two of us could grow enough psilocybin, in a 500 square foot premise to supply the entire county of Yamhill, if not a third of the entire state. The overhead and the spatial requirements are just simply not the same. And I'll also add that the nuisance aspects of psilocybin are also not comparable to cannabis. These grow in the dark. They require very minimal energy at all and water, and are mostly out of sight, out of mind. But they are not required to move together, and they can be done separately.
Okay. And then second question, it sounds like you've talked to commissioners across the state. When they bring up the thought or idea of a 2-year moratorium, what is it that they're waiting for? What do they say that they're waiting for from the OHA before they feel comfortable just adopting this?
Oh, such a great question. They say many things, but I think the first thing that often comes up is that they think they need to wait for the final rules, because they believe that the final rules are going to speak to local considerations of time, place, and manner. They are not. The only things that are going to address time, place, and manner exist in the statute today, which are production facilities, for example, cannot be located in a residential zone. Service centers and all licensees cannot be located within 1,000 feet of schools. There are other specific land use considerations that are in the statute. The OHA is not going to be weighing in on top of that to tell cities and counties what zones they should be considering, what type of sensitive use setbacks they should consider, right? Those are all questions that remain under the authority of a local jurisdiction. And so I think that's probably, one of the biggest misconceptions, is that the OHA is going to weigh in on something and therefore they should wait to see what they weigh in on. Not only is that not the case, but as I mentioned before, the majority of the recommendations that have already been sent to the Oregon Health Authority will be adopted as rule. So we have a pretty good sense already of the 70 plus pages of recommendations that have come from the Psilocybin Advisory Board, that have had thousands of hours poured into them from medical experts from across the state that serve on that board, that really lay out a detailed level of depth as to what the additional rules are going to speak to. But again, just to really hit it home, they are not going to speak to additional time, place, and manner considerations above and beyond what exists in the statute already.
Okay, great. Thanks. Commissioners, any further questions?
I have a question.
I have a question. You
Go
have a
ahead,
question.
go ahead.
Okay, my question, thank you, Sam. The public comment that we received, I think yesterday, was super helpful, though lengthy. I did want to ask about one thing. Our planning department asked about how in statute and in Measure 109 itself, it essentially grants some level of legal immunity to specific state staff, and not to other specific state employees, and not to local governments. And the issue was brought up, the Cole memo provided some level of legal liability immunity for staff at the county when signing off on a Lux, for example, for cannabis. Can you talk about that at all? I mean, I talked to the OHA about it, but I would love to have your thoughts on maybe why that is, and maybe if we should be concerned about that or not.
Sure. The short answer is no. I don't think you should be concerned about it. And I also want to clarify, while the Cole memo definitely allowed a new level of comfort for states to move forward, it provided zero legal protection. It was simply guidance. And I think while it is completely unfortunate that psilocybin remains a Schedule I, I think the fact that the state of Oregon is an adult use cannabis state where that is also a Schedule I, and every level of state government agency is in the same ship. And two, what is different from cannabis from a federal scheduling standpoint is that psilocybin, I think as probably has been mentioned prior, has been given a breakthrough therapy designation by the Food and Drug Administration, a federal agency. And I personally feel that that is a pretty good example of how psilocybin is not actually, as a Schedule I at the federal level, is not actually a medical designation. It's a political one. When we have, the federal government acknowledging its potential benefit above and beyond currently available alternatives. And so, I understand and very much sympathize with, everyone wanting to be careful. We do as well. That's why we center safety, and we are, I think maybe for some folks in the community, overly regulating here. I do not believe that to be the case. We're the first state to move forward. We take our responsibility seriously in getting this right, not perfect, but right. And I really believe that as we continue to do that, there's no reason for concern about federal intervention at the state or local level.
Okay, that was helpful to me. I have
Great.
one other one.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Oh my gosh, what was it? It'll come back to me. I don't want to pause and look awkward. Go
Well-
for it.
Well, that's okay, because this is sort of a piggyback on that.
Okay,
And Sam,
perfect.
thank you for your information. I just wanted to go back to that immunity indemnification. And I know there have been discussions with OHA as far as the counties dealing with their risk exposure with behavioral health clients. And we know it's an issue because we know that Lane County is now in a civil suit arising from one of those issues. So piggybacking on that whole concern in terms of, I know in Arizona, they're doing immunity rather than indemnification. So that's a whole separate issue, but I'm just wondering what your discussions have been with broader discussions, perhaps with OHA or other counties on that issue that is significant for counties to consider.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I'm not familiar with the specific example you gave in Lane County, so I may need you to elaborate on that. But what I will say is that I am not aware of any instance for cannabis or psilocybin, or frankly, any other federally Schedule I drug where a state or local government official that has been following the laws that have been passed at a state level has ever been prosecuted or even sought to be prosecuted for participating in what is otherwise a legal endeavor at the state level.
Okay, and I have one more question, and that has to do with regarding the, because you did mention that there were, in terms of what OHA was going to be coming up with, will there be any additions to the permitting process that we would need to, or would be wise to take under consideration at this juncture? And I know that they're not going to be dealing with time, place, manner issues. That's up to us. But is there anything else that you're aware of in their next timeline that would be, would inform us?
Yeah. I think the answer is yes. I mean, there's going to be additional, again, the recommendations are where the majority of the answers are going to lie. And I think the question goes back to you, what else are you curious in, right? Are you curious about where camera placement needs to be in service centers? That's going to be upcoming in the rules. Are you curious about, other, business requirements in which an operator is going to have to submit for the specific service center application? That's going to be in the rules as well. A lot of it is going to be incredibly technical and dry for the most part. But I think it really depends on what other items you might be curious about outside of TPMs. If you had a sense as to what those were, I would be happy to help identify and lift up the current recommendations that have been sent from the advisory board to the OHA to give you a really good sense as to what's going to be coming.
If you could provide your contact information, I would love to be able to send you some questions and maybe get some information we can share with the other commissioners.
Absolutely.
And Sam, I'll note, I think it was in your, there was a lot of testimony, so forgive me if it was wrong, but, or maybe it was Will Lucas who is on here too. One of you said, also Angela Albee can come from OHA and provide. And so I sent her an email this morning and she would love to come and, or, have questions that are submitted to her for next week, since we
that'd be
do have
great.
a little time.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, okay, great, we can have somebody from there. And
Okay.
I will say, sorry, Chair, Sam, what I'm hearing from you, I mean, the question that I kind of had is, how does this fit into our existing land use system? We have a lot of forestry land and a lot of ag land, and that's really where, we have very little rural residential, we have very little industrial, and I wanted to get a sense of what does it look like for somebody to go to a space, like what's the service center look like? And I think that you've described it to me, I mean, it's a lot of different versions, but what it sounds like is somebody going somewhere and then leaving and then coming back maybe the next day and then leaving and then coming back the next day and then leaving. I know that that's very generic, but it's helpful to me at least that it's not a carnival necessarily.
Yeah, it's certainly will not be a carnival. But the other thing I will say from a 10,000 foot view of what the options are for local governments in terms of TPMs, there's a couple. There are certainly cities and counties that are simply doing nothing. They feel that the state statute highlights their concerns as it relates to the zoning and sensitive uses to schools, et cetera. So one option is you can do nothing and you sign your LUCs and people are on their way. The second option is creating a new specific designation for psilocybin services. This is probably the most cumbersome for county staff in terms of you're literally creating new definitions, right? And I think that while maybe there's reason to consider that, I think it's probably more work than is necessary. I think the most common option that we're seeing people move forward with right now is simply rolling up these psilocybin services and businesses into existing codes and then asking the question, where is there nuance? Where is there actually a difference here that we need to address? If any, and there may be some, and that's just going to be the purview of the local government at the end of the day. But I can tell you that there are localities across the board that are taking all three options. So, if and when you decide to take one of those options, we've got plenty of folks to connect you with that are going through the same process now.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any
Thanks,
further
Sam.
questions?
No, super helpful.
Thank you,
Okay,
Commissioners.
thank you. Okay, we will go to, I think it's hard to read, but Lucius Wheeler.
I'm not Lucius Wheeler, but I'm Will Lucas, but I'm happy to speak if Lucius is not available. All right, good deal. Yeah, it's great to hear this conversation going. I really appreciate all of your openness to hearing from this community, and all the questions is really appreciated.
And Will, if you could just state your name and address for the record, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. My name is Will Lucas. I am at 2245 Buckhorn Springs Road in Ashland, Oregon. So I work as the campaign manager down in Jackson County on the PSI JACO campaign, which is working against an opt-out ordinance that was sent to the ballot here in Jackson County. I also work at Buckhorn Springs, which is going to be one of the first psilocybin retreat centers in the state if we are successful at that in avoiding this opt-out. So I just want to bring those two perspectives here. But honestly, most of what I was going to say, Sam has already said far more eloquently than I can. So I appreciate that, his testimony quite a bit. But yeah, so just to reiterate a couple of things that Sam said, the OHA, what they're working on developing right now are really the details that we need in order to operate in this new industry. I sent in my written testimony a summary of all of the things that were decided in Measure 109 and an additional section on what is in the OHA's current recommendations. And it's just a concise way for you guys to get a sense of what those two documents say. And everything in Measure 109 is law, essentially, is what it comes down to. So there's quite a bit in there that just gives the broad outline of what these service centers will look like. And I think you've heard enough about what that will be. But one consideration is that when you're deciding on how you're going to regulate something like a doctor's office or a hairstylist or a tattoo parlor, it's not you don't really have all the details on how those businesses will be run. There's books of rules and regulations that are associated with every industry, but that's not really the purview of the planning department. And so I think when I've heard counties and cities talking about these, the rules that haven't been put out, there are some things to be decided on, but they are for the most part, specifics that we need in the industry. They're not really things for the planning department to decide on. Most of those things are set for localities to talk about and discuss, and Sam spoke to that very beautifully. So But the thing is that the planning department doesn't necessarily know what these regulations are, but what they do know is that there are professional organizations and legislating bodies that are going to be overseeing these facilities and ensuring the safety of their clients. And so that's the key I'd really like to just put into this, and to speak a little bit to nature-based retreat centers or retreat centers in unincorporated areas. Buckhorn Springs is an example of what those could look like. So we're going to be offering 5-day retreats, 3 to 5 day retreats, where clients will be staying overnight. And to give you a sense of what that process would look like, the first day would be dedicated to preparation. The second day would be dedicated to the administration or the facilitated session. And then the following day is an integration session. So in those kinds of retreats are far more likely to happen in unincorporated areas because that's where you have access to nature-based settings and retreat settings. And in that case, you'd want to think about where those could be located. So it's a larger conversation around what kind of zoning designations you would like to have these retreat centers in. I can say just the nature-based aspect is very important in that case for the privacy and the containing the experience. So just a few notes on that. But overall, these are professional services that are being offered by professionals who have insurance, who are, their insurance premiums are going to climb if there's any kind of problem that comes up in the ceremony or in the session. So this is the key, right? Is that these are professional services being offered by licensed professionals. And over time, this is going to establish into a really legitimate business. And that's the goal of the measure. The goal is to take this out of the black market and bring it into a legal regulated framework. And so that's the key that I'd like to say. I've provided a brief letter from Cameron Meeks, who is a professional mycologist here in Oregon. He talks a lot about what cultivation would look like, and Sam already alluded to the limited amount of resources that are being used for these production facilities. And at the end of the day, there's just not going to be very many of them because they're not terribly profitable in an isolated setting. I also provided some information on the OHA's timeline, which Sam spoke to. And specifically, I think one of the most interesting things that I put into the written testimony is the Medford City Council Planning Department timeline, which they drafted at the request of the City Council on how to implement time, place, and manner regulations within the OHA's current timeframe. And so one of the big questions that Medford City Council had is that initially staff said that they did not have time to get time, place, and manner put together before January 2nd. But on further review, they were able to draft this expedited timeline and showed that they could get it done by January 2nd. But also speaking to what Sam said, it is going to take time. And I'm sure if you work with your community on this, there will be plenty of space for you guys to figure out exactly how this fits best into your county. That's all I have for you. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Will. Any questions for Will?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, and I'm not going to anticipate your questions, but I did want to say thank you, Will. The testimony that was in the record, I confess that I didn't have enough time to read it thoroughly, so I will. But I wanted to ask, because you're in a unique position in being in Jackson County, I saw some of the very brief coverage out there about what the discussion was like for the Jackson County Board of Commissioners, because I understand that they sent a ban to the ballot or are sending one. And yet I'm pretty sure that Jackson County voters voted to approve it back when 109 was up.
Right.
I'm just curious about what that conversation was like, and maybe what information they had access to at that point. Because I feel like we have a lot of information and it's very nuanced and very unique perspectives, but did they?
Yeah, the unfortunate side of that was we reached out and we did want to provide lots of information, and they did take a few meetings with us. But overall, I think they made it clear to us, I think 3 weeks before the decision was made, before we had time to send them any information, that their decision had already been made. We weren't going to be able to change it.
Okay.
Yeah, so and by the time the public hearing came up, there was still some misinformation flying around. But a good result that we had at the commissioners meeting was that after we presented all of our information and testimony, we had an interview with Dave Daughter, one of our commissioners here on a local radio program, and he basically said, hey, we hear the supporters, we understand like cannabis to psilocybin is apples to oranges, that this is not going to be a second run of cannabis. We understand that these services are very promising. We understand, he went through the whole list of things. And that was really good to hear. But basically his thought was, we're going to send this back to the voters and see, just to make sure. His perspective from that radio program was that the statewide vote, basically he said there's two votes. There's the statewide vote and then there's the local vote, which I think there are holes in that argument, because Jackson County voters approved the measure. But nonetheless, that's what he's citing as the commissioner's reason for their decision.
Okay, that was helpful. I understand that it's delicate to describe somebody who you disagree with in their reasoning, but I think you did a good job of being respectful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Sterrett has a
Yes,
question.
Mr. Lucas, thank you for the information. A couple of questions and then related to Jackson County. I think Jackson County is in sort of the crosshairs of what they're dealing with the illegal cannabis grows. And again, to the point about it being the promise was, well, if we take this out of the black market, we'll have less crime, we'll have, and we know how that has not worked out regarding cannabis. We've got foreign cartels, we've got crime, we've got sex and human trafficking, and it's just been horrific human suffering in addition to what our law enforcement has to deal with. And we do have to deal with that in our county as well. So I wanted to sort of pick that piece out, understand where, I do understand where Jackson County came from in this. They're looking at that and they, if you'll excuse the expression, have PTSD over what they were promised. And now they're living the reality of a living hell for people who are caught up in this trade in our law enforcement. So if you could sort of focus on that issue, well, we're going to take this out of the black market and it's therefore going to, it's going to be devoid of those particular pitfalls. Can you just quickly just address that regarding psilocybin and use cannabis as the template, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. So I can speak to that. I think the letter from Cameron Meeks will be very helpful to you in considering that. So the main piece in that letter is that psilocybin is simply different in cultivation. The requirements for cultivating psilocybin on scale are very different from cannabis. So the first piece that makes it different is that people typically only need a few sessions in their life. So you may have in a facilitated context, somebody may have 3 sessions in a lifetime. If they really find benefit and they want to use it on a regular basis, they're not going to use it more than once every 3 months or so. I mean, it has kind of a and they say like an anti-addictive quality where you just don't want to take it more than a few times in a given year. So that's the first thing. So it limits demand substantially. But you could say, well, sure, but you're going to have these legal facilities and then there's going to be demand from out of state. And so maybe these legal facilities will grow sell out the back end. There's 2 things that are really important in that discussion. The first is that these legal facilities are going to be licensed and regulated, and very closely watched. There's door-to-door, as Angela says, door-to-door tracking of every product that's produced. And there's also cultivation limits put in place. So OHA will actually be providing a limit on each cultivator on how much they can legally produce based on the perceived demand in that area. So that means with cannabis, that wasn't the case. And so you had a lot of backstock that built up in people's storage because they produced more than the area could consume. Measure 109 addresses this by limiting production of legal psilocybin. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is that psilocybin on scale is quite challenging to produce, but it's quite easy to produce on a small scale. So a lot of people can produce their own mushrooms in a, a small storage tote. It's a very small footprint that's required to make a substantial number of doses. So you don't see the same kind of centralization that you see with cannabis. To say it this way, Measure 109 is not going to increase the demand for illegal psilocybin. It's going to create a market for legal psilocybin. So in that case, if people are only taking it a few times in a lifetime and would prefer to be in a facilitated contact, then it's going to reduce demand for that illegal market because there's just not going to be as many people pulling into that. Not to say that the illegal market will disappear. I don't think that any of us are arguing that or are saying that. But it is a creating legal access is not. I can't see it increasing demand for illegal psilocybin.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, you're good? Okay. Thank you, Will, appreciate it. Okay, is there anyone online joining us that would like to offer public testimony on Measure 109 that hasn't already spoken?
The other person disappeared.
Please raise your virtual hand. Oh yeah, we lost Lucius.
And I think Garrett Stevenson is here for the list.
Yeah.
It surprised me.
Okay, anyone in the audience that we missed? No? Okay. So the public hearing was specifically to gather public comment about this issue. Originally, though, we did have, at least I had on my calendar, we were going to make a decision about this today, which we can always add on to the end. But how do we feel about that? Do you feel like you have enough information? And I'm just thinking because we have Ken Friday here today, if we have any questions, I don't know if that's something we want to add on at the end for discussion. But I think that next week is the 18th, right? And it's due, the decision is due on the 19th?
Yeah, the deadline to file the paperwork with the clerk's office is the 19th.
I'm a little bit concerned about that. That seems like, if there's any issues with the language or what we're filing,
The
if we file
language
something.
and the required elements to be filed with the clerk were included in the packet last week.
Right.
So they've been drafted. I don't anticipate there being any problems, but
Okay.
you're right. If there is an action taken one day before the deadline, there
Right.
is limited time to correct anything that might be in need of correcting.
Well, I
do
admit
you
that I
feel?
have not read in depth everything that's in the packet. And as you know, my position is let's take the zoning route and perhaps even time, place, manner. I've been thinking about it, so watch out. And so with that, I'm also happy to delay it, but I would also welcome if you feel ready having that discussion later.
The other thing,
Later in this meeting.
I'm sorry, the other thing to keep in mind is if the board wanted to take action today, if one of those actions was to refer either the permanent prohibition or the temporary ban, because we haven't had the 2 weeks that are required between the first and second reading, that would need to be unanimous.
Would need to be a
It would
unanimous
need to
vote.
be unanimous. Yeah.
Okay.
To
So far,
adopt
we
it
don't
as
have
an
the votes for
emergency.
that.
Have we ever done that? Yeah, I think we have.
We have done that
We have.
a
We
lot.
have.
Actually, yeah.
We've done that a lot, but sort of in anticipation of a scenario where it might not be unanimous. That's why we went ahead and had the first reading last week, which would give us the time we needed to have then the second reading last week, which admittedly is right before the deadline. But if the board were in a position for there to be a unanimous decision about one of the two ordinances, that's something that you could take action on today as an emergency. Otherwise, we would need to have a second reading of the option that you coalesce around next week before you had some final discussion. And then if that's the direction you went, adoption of either of those two that we had the first reading on last week.
Well, I mean, I would prefer to at least have a discussion to figure out what our baseline is today, just so we're not having to pull all this forward again next week and potentially have Ken Friday come again next week. And the sheriff and so.
Sheriff, you gonna be here for the discussion? I guess so.
I think there were a few questions for the sheriff.
Well, but we
that
could do
came up.
them today.
Yeah.
Before, I mean, we've got you here. We might as well get a twofer out of you.
And just to clarify, it doesn't necessarily have to wait till further in the agenda. If the board wants to have a discussion and wants to ask
Mhm.
Ken questions or want to ask the sheriff questions, you could do that as part of
Yeah.
this agenda item right now.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'd like to hear from our planning director and from the sheriff
I would as well.
before we
Sounds good.
move forward.
So Director Friday, we had asked for the planning commissioners to sort of weigh in on what their thoughts were. If you want to give us kind of a brief overview, I know you sent the documents, but if you want to give us a brief overview there.
Yes. And then I was wanted to ask as part of that, how you prefaced it, because I just mostly got the responses. I'm not sure if I saw like what the question was.
Yeah,
Or-
and I did try to put
Oh,
the
perfect.
Yeah.
questions in the memo. And the questions were yes or no. Are you opposed to a moratorium on service centers in the unincorporated area? I had 2 yes and 3 no, and 3 did not respond. Yes or no, would you be in favor of a full moratorium on service centers in the unincorporated area? And again, 2 yes, 3 no, and 3 had no response. What got the greatest response was yes or no, would you be in favor of a 2-year moratorium on psilocybin service centers in the unincorporated area? I got 5 yes and 3 no. And in the memo I sent you yesterday, only had 7 people voting. I got 1 vote last night at about 10 o'clock. So that's why it's a little bit different than your memo. And whatever the board decides today, our office did draft up some time, place, and manner placeholder restrictions because it requires 35 days advance notice to be sent to the state. I sent those to the state so that we could talk about them at the September Planning Commission hearing. And these are just placeholder amendments to allow it as a conditional use in the farm zone and manufacturing as a conditional use in site design review and in the farm zone, similar to other facilities that we have. And you know, from what I've heard today, might also consider putting those in the commercial zones. We do have a method where you can apply for what's called a similar use if something is similar to a use that's already allowed in those zones. So we kind of have a way that a citizen can actually apply and make that case. But I do want to say that, you know, if we don't do something to include it in the zone, then I'm going to sign off on the all of deluxe on January 3rd as no, because we don't have it as a permitted use within the zone. So I still have concerns. You know, I heard the comments from folks, and then basically what I heard was, well, don't worry about it. You know, Oregon Health Authority has this under control, and I have not found that to be the case with medical marijuana. When medical marijuana came in, we were trying to work with Oregon Health Authority to find out where these medical marijuana facilities were, and we couldn't get that information because it was protected by HIPAA. And eventually, after quite a while, they allowed like one person in the county to be able to call and get that sort of information. So I don't have that strong feeling that the Oregon Health Authority will assist us with enforcement of this. And so I think it is incumbent upon us, and you know, I think it's clear in the measure that it's incumbent upon us to develop time, place, and manner restrictions. And I found it interesting to hear, you know, that you know, facilities in Jackson County, they envision them to be retreat centers where people stay overnight. I don't know if that's something that our planning commission or board or you know, farming community would like to have. And so those are sort of the things that we'll need to be discussing in the next couple of months to come up with time, place, and manner restrictions. And that's really a discussion for another day, but did want to let you know our planning commission want you to think about the 2-year moratorium, and regardless of what you decide, though, we will be talking about time, place, and manner. At least, I'm proposing that we do that, and I'm sure that unless I get told from the board not to do that, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So Director Friday, when we're going back a few years here, but with medical marijuana facilities, was that not, I don't remember, was that not a land use procedure?
I don't think there
No,
was, right?
there
No.
wasn't really a Lux. And so what you do is, as I recall, and the sheriff can probably help to, supplement with what the law was. But I think if you had a medical card, you could have 6 plants, but you could also have your card under someone else's authorities. If they were better at growing plants, then one person could have several cards and grow several plants. And so if we had a code enforcement person going out and they had a barn that had electrical that was unpermitted, that had 75, 80 plants, we would just call in and say, hey, is this a legal grow? Or is this something that we should be concerned with? It seems like it's an awful lot of plants. And they would say, can't tell you, HIP protected. And there are things in Measure 109 that talks about things that are protected, and I respect that. I don't want my medical things to be known to everybody, but at the same time, when they say, well, Oregon Health Authority has this, they're going to be regulating this, and really some counties are not doing anything and just let it go into law. Well, I still have some concerns land use wise, and I think we'll be trying our best to address those.
Can I follow
Okay.
up, or no, you're going to follow up on that?
Well, I have a slightly different question.
Oh,
so go
okay,
ahead.
I was going to follow up. So there wasn't a Lux then for medical marijuana
That's correct.
during the time when you were describing this, right?
Right.
So enforcement actions that you have authority to take, what would those be limited to?
Well,
Because you weren't authorized, your code enforcement wasn't authorized to break up a farming operation, right?
right. No,
Yeah.
we were looking at building and
Totally,
yeah,
electrical supply. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and you still have the authority to do that,
Yes.
right? Even whether you knew if it was illegal, if it was an overgrow or not.
And I
But
do
you will
wanna-
have with the psilocybin, you'll have a Lux and possibly other land use actions.
Well, my concern is about the service centers.
Okay,
And I want to stress, I'm not that concerned about the
Yeah.
growing, because it does take quite a bit less in the
Yeah.
way of resources to grow it.
Yeah.
So and that's why the questions to the planning commission were about the service centers. So that's what I'm concerned with.
right. And then along those lines, then, so you would know, you will know about all prospective licensees with both growing and service centers if they're allowed because of the Lux or because of the conditional use permit process, right?
Correct, but I do have a concern, and Oregon Health Authority has on their question and answers, and I looked at this last week. I don't know if it's been updated, but it says, section 91.3 appears to give affirmative right to a service center to lawful growers of psilocybin. Service centers don't have much for sideboards in the ballot measure. This is the question that they put out. If a grower asserts a right for, say, a service center consisting of 3-day retreat with food service and overnight stays, is that presumed to supersede state or local land use prohibitions on retreat centers? And their answer is, well, this is a complex question. As we get further into rulemaking process, we'll be happy to reconvene with local government partners to discuss more details once they are known. So we don't know, but don't worry, it'll be okay. I'm worried. I'm just worried about the service centers being out in the rural area. What are they going to look like? And they've given us authority to do the time, place, and manner. I propose that we go ahead with our planning commission and do that.
Can I follow up? Then on
Yeah,
that? I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Well, that was kind of
Oh,
my
yeah,
question,
yeah.
but go ahead.
Well, so if we had a conditional use permit process for a service center, then would it not be true that we are saying you have to apply for this conditional use permit and a site design review? If you're a grower who is also submitting a Lux for their license or for their service center license, so I'm seeing a nod, but are you concerned that they will say, I'm going to do it anyway?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm concerned that they'll say, well, we've got the right to do it anyway,
Mhm.
based on measure 109. So, I've seen other counties that are going along the lines of, we're going to split these out. And I'm
Mhm.
going to be saying that we ought to do the same thing,
Yeah.
splitting the grow from the service center. But the way the measure is written, I'm not sure. And so that's something that we'll be exploring.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, service centers, I'm assuming, would cost a considerable amount of money, right? I mean, you're setting up a facility.
Right.
So there's some sort of natural restriction there, but in terms of TPM, I'm not against TPM when it comes to a conditional use or processing facility like we've had with marijuana. It's the manufacturing side that I don't like. So as long as we're sort of narrowly focused on that, which we are, that's fine. But I read somewhere, I don't know, somewhere in the stack of papers, but it said that we have the ability to impose TPM. But are you worried about the state saying, well, that's too far, or we don't like this? Do they have the authority to do that?
It's a good question. I think that the measure has this, this question as an open one that even Oregon Health Authority doesn't have the answer to. I don't have the answer to, and so it's a good question as to what the courts would decide. A good example would be the Brent Mawr versus Jackson County. We thought we had the ability in county government to put certain regulations down, and the Oregon Supreme Court said, no, you don't have the authority to put those certain regulations down, and that you must allow these types of uses in the farm zone. And so it was an example of something, it's a case from a while back, but it could be that you'll have something like this where we'll put down that, well, if you're growing it, you can't have the service center without going through the conditional use process. The court may decide, no, if you're growing it, you have the ability to have a service center there. And that would be something that I would be concerned with if we don't have a site design review and a conditional use process, and demonstration that the use satisfies 215.296 about the conflicts with farm and forest uses nearby. And again, I'm talking about just the service center. I'm not talking about the growing.
Yeah.
But we do have TPM for marijuana processing facilities. We have certain restrictions, site design reviews that we put
We
in
have
place.
site design review where we put down basically time, place, and manner restrictions.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Right.
ostensibly we have them.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at is if we told, the Chehalem Mountain Processing Center, you have to build a 10-foot wall around your entire property, that's unreasonable. And that was part of the discussion, is how much of this is unreasonable to the point where, they run it up the legal chain and now we're told you can't do that. So I'm just trying to, I don't know where the balance is, right? I think we err on the side of reasonableness, but I don't know what the state, what authority they have to come back and say, well, you actually can't tell them to do that. So now we're compromising safety.
Is the process, I wonder about this, is the process for adopting time, place, and manner restrictions in which you send it to DLCD? Are you sending it to DLCD when you said that 35-day notice period?
That's correct. Yeah.
So they would ultimately be the judge then, right, of whether this is something that's unreasonable
Well,
or acceptable, I guess.
Yeah, they can weigh in on it. That 35-day notice allows them to have the ability to make comments on it. Correct.
Okay. And
Okay.
that would essentially, because I'm wondering, I'm thinking about if there's an affirmative right and it's asserted if you're a producer, manufacturer, and you come to the county and say, hey, I'm gonna do this, and you say, and Lance is at the counter and says, this is a conditional use permit process with a site design review. And also we have time, place, and manner restrictions. And a prospective licensee says, well, I have an affirmative right. I don't have to do a conditional use permit process. Measure 109 says that we can impose TPMs. So no matter what, they'll have TPMs on their service center, right? Is that, am I interpreting
It
this right?
says both
Yeah.
things. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the problem, is it
Okay.
says
Yeah.
both things.
So if we can,
But
I
I
guess,
want
like,
to get those adopted too.
right,
so.
yeah, exactly. Okay,
Well, and the statute specifically says that whatever TPMs we adopt, along the theme of reasonableness, it says we can, reasonable conditions twice, reasonable limitations, reasonable requirements. So it's all going to come down to what is or isn't
sure.
reasonable.
And I guess that's where we work with prospective service centers too, right? That they provide comment and.
Couple of things.
ahead,
Chair Bershauer, you said something along the lines, well, it would be considerable financial investment to set up a service center, but what we're hearing is that all it requires is an office. And I don't know about you, I've been in some pretty bare bones offices that it's a desk, a chair, and a couch, or a chair recliner. I don't know what it would look like, but so I think that really we could see the gamut of the very nice and the very basic. And
Mhm.
that's a consideration for us to be thinking in terms of what this does to our landscape rurally. The other question I had, Ken, so are you thinking that now the permit process opens, OHA opens the permit process in 2023. So ostensibly at that point, all of this is going to have to have been sorted out. Are you expecting in the next couple of weeks, because we don't have all the information, and they're telling us that none of those, what will be coming in the next couple of weeks will have anything to do with what we're involved in here, which is time, place, matter, and land use. Are you thinking that more time, those next couple of weeks, will net you the information you need at this point?
No, I don't think a couple of weeks would net all the information that I would need, but that means that what I would propose would be something narrower than, and so if I don't have the questions answered, then I'm probably going to pull back and not propose as much. Now, again, it's up to the planning commission and board ultimately, but if I'm not getting the answers to my questions, then I'm probably not going to propose it to be in very many locations, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So is that something we could factor into our consideration today, knowing that, maybe less is more at this point because we just don't have all the information?
Oh, and that sounds like a question for us, maybe.
Well,
But maybe it's a question.
no,
for-
I'm just, and also your input is.
Well, from listening to this, and I would probably just have it be, change my recommendation to go from it being in the farm zone. I'm talking about service centers, not about growing, but have that just be in the commercial zones. The neighborhood commercial zone comes to mind, just have it be in that zone, and that's it. And we don't have that much of that zoning in the county. But because, I don't have the answers from Oregon Health Authority. I've got proposals, but I don't have answers from them. And I haven't read all of the things that came in.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll change my mind, but because I don't have those answers, I probably would propose something a lot less as far as areas that would be allowed, because it's a lot easier than later on to expand those areas if we find out, no, we'd like to have it in more areas than it is to shrink those. And when you put additional regulations on it, then you have to do a Measure 56 notice, and it gets to be pretty expensive and pretty cumbersome. So, if this is something that they're still working on, then I would probably, shoot for a pretty small area that it would be allowed in.
Interesting.
I was gonna say, because I understood what your question was, and I think it's a decent question. Personally, so I always forget, but I'm declaring a potential conflict of interest because I'm a owner of multiple pieces of farmland. But with that said, I would be personally more comfortable, and I hope that the planning commission would be, with having it in farm zone, because it would be a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use then. And so I guess the question then with the neighborhood commercial is, would a person have to apply for a similar use hearing? Or would it be an automatic by virtue of decision?
No, I would propose then, putting it into that zone, if I was gonna just
Okay,
have it.
okay.
Yeah, so that it'd be clear that it's in that zone, it's something that's allowed in that zone
And mostly I say that with the farm zoning because, because parcels are larger, neighborhood commercial is very small. And they're obviously at, the Dairy Queen on the way to Sheridan, and by us, there's a deli, right? And those are intersections and places where adding more is, there's impact to neighbors, potential impact for everything. Whereas large parcels that are limited, because we could limit them, right? We could say your footprint can't be more than 20,000 square feet or 10,000, right? I presume that time, place, and manner would allow us to do that because it's reasonable, I think. That on a scale, it's reducing the impact by spreading it out for the few that might be there, as opposed to that like really concentrated in a neighborhood commercial.
Okay, I have a couple questions for the sheriff, but I want to take a quick 5-minute break so people can reboot here before we get into that. So we will re-adjourn.
And also, thank you. I want to just know publicly that Director Friday and Lance were both super helpful in kind of sitting down and laying this out and talking it through offline here. So thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, as always.
Sorry,
we might have more questions. I just want to take a quick break. Okay, we'll re-adjourn at 11:36.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we are back in session, informal session. It is 11:38. And we're picking up off where we left off on the public hearing regarding Measure 109. Sheriff, if you could come up for just a few minutes. We had some questions come forward from residents just about the impact that, let's say we don't send anything to the ballot and this starts January 3rd. The impact it might have on your department, what you've kind of seen with regard to psilocybin. I have talked to several firefighters in the county and asked them how much of a problem psilocybin is in terms of recreational, not smart use. And the response is consistently, it's not really a problem. We don't really see it that much. And they said the worst thing they said was it kind of ebbs and flows. And sometimes, you'll catch 4 or 5 kids trying them just to do something stupid and they get sick and that's about it. But consistently the message has been, it's not really an issue. So is that what you're seeing? And what do you anticipate for your department?
I would say the same thing, that it consistently, we come across them every once in a while. You take a baggie of some mushrooms off of a kid and sometimes they're not even the right ones. They thought they were psychedelic ones and they got sold a bag of just mushrooms you can buy at Safeway. So it's always, our concern always is going to be safety and public safety. And, the impacts from a public safety perspective come from several areas, and primarily for us would be traffic safety. If they're impaired and they're driving, listening to testimony today, I heard more than what I've heard to this point about kind of the regulation on, having to have that driver for transportation approved prior to going through the treatment. That, these sessions are, like Commissioner Kula had said, it's not like you're showing up today and then you decide to go back tomorrow and then you're going to go again this weekend. That it appears that these type of sessions are limited in scope. Their amount of times that they show up are not going to be as much. So, it's always, our concern is always going to be, the what ifs, the unknowns. And I can tell you from my expertise in the field, which I don't use illicit drugs, but our concern is always the people who take advantage of a legal system. And so you have your law-abiding people, the ones who need the treatment, the ones who could benefit from the treatment, the ones that are going to use it the legal and appropriate way. And then you're going to have your non-legal black market individuals. Marijuana, I think, is a significant difference, and it's hard to compare the two because from a marijuana perspective, it takes someone who has a lot of, in my mind, expertise and knowledge and somewhat of a green thumb to have the patience to grow it, maintain it, and get it to that perfect type of product to get you the best quality product. That's why I think there's so much more of a black market because it takes a very specific type of person and there's a financial piece to it, as opposed to mushrooms. That's something that could be done very easily. It doesn't take very much expertise. And you could, as one person had said, in a small little storage tote in your closet, grow enough for you to be able to use as a personal. So those concerns in my mind are a little bit out the door. And the fact that there's not going to be as many people that are just now going to say, okay, I'm going to grow an entire field of mushrooms and I'm going to start a black market. I just don't see that occurring as much. But there is concerns, I would agree with Director Friday. I like what I've heard and I like the comments that are made about the process and the procedure and the plans are going to be put in place. It's just, my dealings with a combination of not just OLCC, but also Oregon Health Authority in the previous implementation with medical marijuana, now up to recreational and adult use. is that they didn't do as good of a job as they said they're going to do. I think they were a little underwhelmed or overwhelmed and understaffed
Mhm.
on what that was going to look like. So if they've learned anything, hopefully moving forward in this process and given some of the stuff that is written in the statute and some of the things that are accounted for in the draft rules, I think they've understood a little bit more of what they need to do, planning moving forward.
Mhm.
And so the hope would be that it would be dealt with in a much better way from the state and a lot less of an issue for law enforcement. And for what it's worth, you know, the sheriffs across the state, this is not a topic that we're really talking about. It's not a topic that has come up in our meetings of major concerns about timings and moratoriums. We're still very much concentrating on the illegal marijuana market
Mhm.
and having to deal with that because, as Commissioner Starrett said, that's brought in a very huge amount of additional criminal elements into our community that we don't need. And I just don't know if that's what you're going to see here.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the sheriff?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sheriff, for sticking around and being part of this discussion. Can you outline sort of the chain of command or what's the hierarchy in terms of enforcement? Is this an OLCC thing, or how will your department be implicated, or will you, or is that a code enforcement strictly?
I would look at this as more of you know, we're going to get involved if there's a criminal act after the fact for enforcement and compliance. That's going to be a combination of county code enforcement for any regulations that you guys put in for TPM, and then either OLCC or the Oregon Health Authority Enforcement Division for managing and making sure that the facilitators are following guidelines. But I don't anticipate law enforcement as a whole getting involved in any of those aspects of these facilities.
Okay, thank
Right,
you.
Right, that's a good point. I was just thinking, you know, my experience growing recreational cannabis, that it's probably, you're probably right that it's like if there's a, you know, if they're tracking and then suddenly there's no product that they have a destination for, but it existed, that'll be a time when OLCC or OHA then comes in and says, where did it go? They do the investigation and then they pull the license or they fine them if they've diverted, right?
Correct.
And then
when-
I guess if they find evidence then of criminality, right, that's when you would come in.
Yeah, and they'd either work a joint investigation with our office, but most of the time it's they're handing us the ones that are not licensed, that are completely 100% off the book, illegal operations, and those are the ones we deal with.
Right.
And then anything that is licensed and facilitated through the state, then they take care of all the enforcement on that.
Yeah. Okay. That's super helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for the sheriff? Okay, thank you, Sheriff.
I mean, and he had to stick around, just so you know, because
yeah.
he's next on the agenda.
Yeah, you're stuck with us. So just a follow-up question for Director Friday. So we have, I think it's pretty much assumed we're doing TPM, whatever decision we make. We have 4 months essentially until January 3rd. You had just mentioned that you would probably err on the side of being more restrictive. At least one version, maybe it's the initial version, I don't know, but if we have 4 months, does that give you time to adjust those? If we do hear from OHA and we do see more clarity there, do we have time to adjust our TPMs before the end of the year and get them approved?
Yes,
Okay.
and what I'm maybe ineloquently saying is that, you know, we do have time to do some time, place, and manner, but there's still going to be, I anticipate some questions that will be, you know, still out there as far as what zones to allow it in. I'm saying that since I don't have all the answers today, I probably would have maybe a smaller area that I would be recommending if I had some of those answers, and maybe I'll get them from what has been submitted today. And from talking with our legal counsel, maybe I would want to have a little bit larger area where it would be allowed, but ultimately it's up to the planning commission and board. And we would, my goal is to come up with some time, place, and manner restrictions that would be reasonable and that would be enacted on January 3rd. And if we don't have them, then we really can't sign off on anything because we really need to have it identified where it's going to go. Because if it's not listed as a use that is permitted in our code, it's not something that we can allow.
Okay. So, so you mentioned maybe we just restrict this to commercial zones. But if in a month, in 30 days, we hear more clarity, you have some more answers to your questions, and you might feel comfortable expanding that into EFU. Is that something, do we have enough time to make that change?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
still
Oh,
hear
yeah,
the
that's
planning
right.
commission? Okay, okay.
Well, and just a reminder, Ken, is the process that we'd have to go through. You've mentioned that this has to go through the planning commission, any TPM, and then it would have to come to the board.
Right.
And those would be subject to hearings, correct?
Correct.
If you
yes.
want to talk about some of that process. So
Yeah, that'd be
again,
good.
a lot of the discussion and the deliberation that's going to be taking place, this is all going to be part of an extensive process over the next, I don't know what the time frame looks like, but between now and January, there's a process for further input, more testimony, more discussions, Ken's going to provide a recommendation or that baseline, but then it's really going to be up to going through the full process. And then that recommendation from the planning commission that then would come for the board for final adoption as well. Correct.
But would we have to do that anyway, even if we decided to send it to the ballot? We'd still have to do that.
And I'm
No,
saying
yeah,
that
that's true.
we will be doing that anyway.
Okay.
Whatever decision you're making related to the ballot measure or measures, we would be doing that anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is there any further questions for Director Friday? Maybe some technical questions that haven't.
No, I don't
answered?
think so. I
Okay.
feel like with the back and forth, I understand kind of the process going forward and especially what you need to have in order to sign off on a Lux on Jan 3rd. Because it's not even the permitting process. It's what zone is this allowed in when I compare it to, which is ultimately what the Lux is all about.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to jump in here first, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
So I admit this has been a steep learning curve. I went from one end of the spectrum to the other. But you know what, that's part of our job. And sometimes these things come up. I did read the planning commission commissioners' responses, and it appears that, they really didn't have a lot of information. So
Yeah.
one of them, I think, said, I can't even pronounce psilocybin, so I'm not really sure what I'm doing.
That's how I interpreted that one too. Was, oh yeah, he needs more information.
Well, but if you think back a month ago, I didn't even know how to say psilocybin. So it's like, here we are,
I
come
think I
full
heard it on the
circle.
radio, so.
Yeah. But one of so I mentioned I've been talking to various people, the fire department, some other folks, veteran services. This is I believe this is something that they have tried to implement for veterans with PTS and other things. And they see it as a very promising treatment. But I have a friend who actually owns some mental health clinics across the Northwest, and she is not someone who you would typically assume would be a proponent for psilocybin. But she said, absolutely, we're doing this. We are already training some of our employees to be facilitators in advance and in anticipation of this coming in Oregon, which I really thought was pretty eye-opening. It was, like I said, she's not someone that I would have expected to hear that from. And we have other treatments, and I have done EMDR before. So we have other treatments that are non-synthetic drug-related treatments that are effective. And I really kind of have come full circle on this and realized that this is something that is in line with some of those other treatments. I'm not really sure. I keep asking myself, what is another vote at the ballot actually get us? What does it answer for us? And I'm not sure it actually answers anything or provides anything, because I see our role as more of a land use related role, not the OHA role where you're having to put some sideboards and bumper lanes around how this is going to roll out. That's not our role. So while we might have questions and concerns over safety, I've kind of had to pull myself back and say that's not really our role. Our role is to make sure that this can exist in Yamhill County in a safe and effective manner, and respect the vote, the public vote that happened, not only statewide, but it did pass here in Yamhill County. So some of the other commissioners that have been making these decisions have said, well, we're just, we're going to follow what our voters said and put it back on the ballot because they rejected it, countywide. That's not the case here. So I'm really struggling to identify what it is that even a 2-year moratorium would allow us that we can't effectively plan for in the next 4 months, and give our staff the surety of, hey, this is coming January 3rd. It's not an if, right? We're not going to find out November 8th that less than 2 months later, this is going to be on our doorstep. We actually have some time to plan responsibly. So that's kind of where I'm going. I'm not really sure what a ballot measure, another vote, public vote would give me that would change my mind. And I don't like the idea of being stuck or having to scramble on November 8th to make sure that we've done what we needed to do and done our homework. So I'll just kind of offer that to start the conversation.
Yeah.
Commissioners.
I'm happy to, I don't have a lot because we've said a lot. But I think the thing that I came into this thinking, and I sat up late last night looking at the testimony and then thinking about, was the question of what does a 2-year moratorium get? What does it gain for people in the county and for staff? And I thought, okay, well, staff is already doing the land use work. We're going to see it regardless. There'll be opportunities for public input from neighbors and from friends of Yamhill County. I think is still in the back here.
Yep.
Good to hear it'll be good to hear your thoughts in a public setting. That sending a ban, even if it's a 2-year ban to the ballot, is a statement that's not neutral, right? It's a positional statement. That doesn't sit right with me to have it be anything but a neutral position, and we have no ability to put together a neutral position on it. And then I think the last point that kind of said to me, like, just in this moment, no, we shouldn't do a 2-year moratorium, was Leah Peckler, I think.
Nurse,
And I was honestly a little bit surprised. Like, I almost started crying because I realized that there's people in our community who have what she wrote down as existential distress. And I was like, whoa, it's really intense. And they won't be able to have that option of having something that takes care of that. I'm gonna stop now.
Yeah, and I think that's really, we've heard from a very diverse group of people that support this.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wouldn't expect to see that.
Yeah.
So I do want to acknowledge that. And I just want to add, as you said, the endorsement, if we put a 2-year moratorium on the ballot, it is an acceptance that this is going to be in Yamhill County, at least the manufacturing side, immediately. But what does that really do in practice? And I think James talked about it very well, in the sense that you give this window that provides for out-of-state corporate influence to come in. We're already seeing that with other commodities. that we grow here. We're seeing it with, in some cases, the wine industry as well.
We just saw that
So
this
is
week.
that really what we want to do? I don't think that's the intention of this board. Yeah, and like I said, in terms of our role, I don't know that there's questions that we might have that can't be solved or answered with the land use process and Director Friday's team working on that in our planning commission. We always have questions about OHA, you know. Let's not talk about the past 2 years. But, you know, I'm not sure that actually is something that we ultimately have control over or really is even pertinent to our role as county commissioners. So, Commissioner Sterrett.
Well, Chair, excuse me, I came in here. Well, first of all, at the beginning of this, I thought, well, we just need to do a total ban on this. Then I listened to people give testimony, and then I spoke to people who, as you mentioned, Chair, I talked to people who have done this in a ritual capacity as part of a ritual. I've talked to practitioners who I would never have expected would have endorsed this in limited applications. I talked to a variety of people who've done this recreationally. And what I came back with is that there is a therapeutic, there is an appropriate therapeutic use of this. And so I have sort of gone in completely different perspective on this. The other thing is, I don't believe that, you know, when government prohibits something, all it does is it opens the door for a black market, but then again, when it legalizes it, we've got a black market as well. So I guess I'm concerned about some of the misuse of this, but we're seeing people misuse prescription drugs, and we're seeing them misuse just about everything from alcohol on up. So I had to remove that perspective from the discussion. When we talk about how Measure 109 was received in various counties, to go back to Jackson County, it passed by 51.1%, and in Yamhill County, barely by 50.1%. But then let's go to Multnomah County, big surprise, 71.2% passed, and then in Lincoln County, 57.5%. So there's a wide variety there. It's not a referendum. Our job is not to do a referendum on Measure 109 or the use of psilocybin. I think that people are ignoring the fact that there are significant risks and side effects to the use of psilocybin, and to not have even brought those into the discussion, I think is either, you know, wishful thinking or disingenuous, because there are some very significant side effects, but there are two prescription drugs, and we know the FDA has not exactly been upfront about those. To go back to OHA, I have very little confidence in Oregon Health Authority, very little confidence in their decisions, their processes, and their integrity. And we have seen this over the years, starting with Pat Allen, Dean Seidlinger. We have been basically lied to. So I don't have any confidence they're going to come up with anything that we might have any confidence in. What I do have confidence in is our planning director and their staff. And I want to mention Lance at this point. He's always front and center on this. So I have confidence in them. And I don't think it's my job to tell people whether to do this or not to do it, but it is our job to make sure that what we do is something that's going to work. So I went from wanting a full ban to a 2-year to us saying, hands off, it's only up to us to address the land use implications.
Well, Chair, if I may, I want to respond a little bit too. Everybody else hold your ears, but I'm going to say that I watched you learning and listening, and I admired that. So
You watched the
hopefully you didn't
transformation.
hear that.
You watched the evolution.
It was just between the two of us, I'm pretty sure.
No, I have to say that testimony, you know, in this case, people say, oh, it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't matter. My voice doesn't matter, but it does, because if people say, oh yeah, I read the public comment that people send in. Well, you know, when we send it to our state legislators, I don't think they do for the most part, but I can tell you when you send it to us, I know that each one of the commissioners reads it. So I've read it, I've listened to you, and here we are.
Oh, along those lines, if I may, to add to that comment about public comment, is that I was really intrigued by how I didn't recognize, with the exception of Jason Lampman, because he's been here, I actually didn't recognize anybody's name
Right.
in the public comment. And I thought that was really interesting.
Mhm.
It was, and
Hey,
it was
folks.
all kind of across the board, as you said, the different experiences. And I'm
Mhm.
specifically talking about what was in the emailed records. So,
Mhm. And I looked for those certain names
yeah,
that
you're
often
like, oh, okay,
contact us.
here's this kind of, this is their
Yeah.
lane and this is their lane, right?
And it wasn't the
Yeah.
case, so.
Yeah. So
And I
good on
said,
you.
I said James, I meant Jason. I got a text messages from a James, so that was on my mind. But Jason, your testimony about corporate influence was spot on.
No, it was the baby.
Yeah. Well, your baby's name isn't James.
It
So
was
thank you
more
for
than
that.
Just the baby.
Well,
I do,
okay.
Chair, I do think that, I mean, we've talked about this a long time. I want to make sure that it works for the zone, that works for everybody, and that Planning Commission feels comfortable with, and that you all feel comfortable with. And then let's just see, right?
Yep.
Both the testimony from the public, what they think, and how it works.
Yeah, I look forward to those discussions and the public input on that.
Yeah.
Christian, we don't need a vote, right? There's consensus that we are not putting anything on the ballot.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, there would not be a need for a formal action, and then we simply wouldn't bring back either of the ordinances for a second reading or further consideration next week. The statute just allows the board to consider adopting. If you don't, there's nothing further that needs to be done.
Okay.
The law will go into effect, and then the planning department will proceed with their time, place, and manner work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hopefully the headline tomorrow or Friday is OMG, they agreed on something.
Well, I know
And
that-
especially this thing.
I did note that I think a couple of weeks ago, there was a specific note in the paper that you and I agreed on something, but I can't remember what.
In
it was.
rare,
Yes,
in
yes.
rare form.
And I was the outlier. And it was great because it kind of busted up the narrative that we're the evil twins. Well, maybe it didn't totally on that, because that probably is still out there, but
And-
we
and-
are in lockstep.
Who would ever have thought that what you agreed upon was mushrooms?
Mushrooms.
No kidding. Of
was
all
a
things
surprise
to
to me.
agree on.
Oh my gosh.
They have
thank
healing
you.
properties. Yes,
Healing
they do.
properties.
Okay, well, that's the consensus. That's how we will move forward. And then we look forward to seeing more from Director Friday and your team and
Mhm.
how
thank
we
you.
will schedule those out in terms of public input.
I never thought this would happen today. I wasn't expecting.
I wasn't either.
I think Mark Gabler should be sent an entire file, all of this public testimony, so he can figure out what psilocybin is.
With a pronunciation guide.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for.
Thank you, everyone, for
everybody.
offering testimony. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, but we're
Oh.
not done.
And I just want to,
So just for the record, the hearing's closed.
yes, hearing is closed. And we don't have to officially acknowledge this into the record. No? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
All righty. Let's see. Okay, we will move on to department updates. And today we are being joined by our sheriff, Tim Svensson. If you could come on up for your department update. And Sheriff, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but we were going to ask if you could say a few words about former Sheriff Crabtree.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I thought I'd start off with talking about mushrooms, but I don't know how to say psilocybin
Psilocybin.
either. So that's why I refer to them as mushrooms. But yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so tomorrow will be a good day. We'll have a real nice service for them. We've been able to put together a really good program. For those who are planning on attending, the parking's going to be a little bit limited, but we've got some shuttles set up and places for people to park in a field locally. You know, Jack was here when I first started my career in 99, and he was a detective, and I always knew that there was a guy that was upstairs in a detective office that he was very professional, always clean, wearing a suit, hair was always nice and proper. And if you had any issues with any cases and you need something solved, you went and talked to that guy, because he was not gonna let the case go. And so he from the very beginning, he was a good mentor of mine, turned into an excellent friend. We'll miss the phone calls that I got from him over the last few years of just checking in on me, making sure things are good. So
Yeah.
tomorrow will be a good day, and we lost a good one in law enforcement. So
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you.
And far too young.
Yes.
Thank you.
So
Thank
with
you.
that, let's talk about the office and where we're at. These are all good things. So I guess that's a good thing. So emergency management, real quick. We've been having a lot of conversations across the county about, well, what we're referring to as like a mass casualty incident, but we're trying to change the terminology on that because it's more of a, MCIs are used in fire services in multiple different formats, but this would be more for a, a mass shooting of some sort, whether it's an active shooter at a school or just at a local, winery or anything. And what our response would be to that. And so we've engaged that conversation. We've very quickly learned that there needs to be two arms to this, because anytime you try to put together a countywide protocol, you want to make sure that everybody that is going to be involved in that process has a say in what the protocol is. It's really hard for me to set policy for what the fire service is going to do and what the dispatch center is going to do and what other law enforcement will do. So what we've decided is, and he, thankfully, because this is something that Sergeant Young is very, very energized and excited about, and he does this very well. He's going to be engaging all of our partners and working on that global protocol and policy. He'll be bringing in public health, the school districts, the fire services, and bringing everybody to the table to have that conversation. At the same time, we also have the tactical response, where we have our law enforcement who will continue to partner with the fire services to do the training on what our response is. So the two-pronged approach is, one will be the policy and protocol that will be adopted countywide, and then the application and training on it. So we have a sergeant assigned to that. He's working with Sergeant Young in emergency management to do that part, and then we'll continue with the training moving forward. So
That's really good to hear. Thank
yeah,
you.
and part of the training equipment request that was funded in this current fiscal year from the last budget process is going towards some of the equipment that we'd be using for some of the training and response to these type of calls. So.
And Dr. John Heiser's sort of been instrumental in
Oh, yeah.
kind of restarting this. I know
Mhm.
Sergeant Young is quick to say, listen, this is not just one agency, that they have to all be involved. So they've been really great to at least start to mobilize everything again.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll
Sure.
more to come on that one as that continues to go forward.
Sheriff, was that something that was kind of directed by the state, or is it just something that we are?
No, it was
Taking
something we
initiative.
started doing internally. We,
Okay.
it was brought up probably 3-4 years ago, and the process was started. We had one of my sergeants who had worked previously at the city of McMinnville had started that conversation with McMinnville Fire.
Mhm.
And then Dr. Heiser was heavily involved with that process as well. And it's kind of morphed into our office, and I keep telling myself I'm not going to blame COVID for anything else, but we all know that the last 2 years, things pretty much kind of stopped, and we were dealing with a completely different animal.
Mhm.
And so now we're able to start, getting back to what we were doing 2 years ago, to try to pick that up and continue moving it forward.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. So from our office, as you know, we had a outside entity come in and do a management 360 review. They reviewed our supervisor structure. They completed that report in June of 2022, so just a couple months ago. The nice part about it is they had about 70% of our office participated in that. So it was either in some sort of form, they sent out a survey office-wide, which was easy for people to complete. But we also had a high percentage of people that responded to actually having one-on-one interviews with the assessors. The assessors had a lot of good things to say about the participation, because they said typically organizations our size, you don't get that level of participation. And so they're really impressed with the participation level, which they meant by that was the findings and the results that they provided to us means that it's a really good representation of what our office sees and where they feel that our office is going. A lot of the positives were people just really enjoy working here. They believe in what the work our office is doing. They have positive and engaged relationships with their immediate supervisor. Some of the areas that we can improve, which I knew were areas that we could always improve in, has to do with communication within the organization. Traditionally, the top of the office believes that all that communication is being pushed down appropriately. And obviously, this shows that, as we know, it's very hard for us to communicate throughout the entire organization effectively. So we got to figure out how to do that better. We had started a strategic plan initiative and a policy and procedures manual review that was put on pause with COVID, and they all liked that we had started that process, and they encouraged us to continue that and move that forward and complete that. And then a few other things relating to staffing reviews, different things within internal within our office when it comes to restructuring. The conversation that we had a few weeks ago about some creating a new position for professional standards. Those are all things that came from this review of things that would benefit our office as a whole moving forward. So we're going to continue to move on some of those projects. Once we get the restructuring done, then we will start re-energizing the strategic plan and the policies and procedure manual review. So staffing for us right now. So we currently have 9 vacancies. Seems like we're always just having to continually hire people. Of those 9, there's 5 deputies. So we have some management positions that, like I said, that we've had opened up, but we also anticipate at least possibly up to 7 new vacancies over the next 6 months to a year based off of attrition, retirement, promotions within the office. So what that means is, just like every other department in the county, we're continuing to try to find ways to recruit, and we're constantly trying to figure out how and why we're not getting, how are we getting good quality candidates to apply for us, number one, and then why are we not getting more? Is the platform that we're using to advertise the appropriate one? Is there just not enough candidates out there? Are we just not reaching the right people? And how can we engage the appropriate way to get good candidates coming in to our world? I think what we're seeing across the state is a little bit of not necessarily a lack of qualified candidates, but a lack of candidates who want to go into this work. There's been a lot of changes over the years and a lot of stresses that have been added to this line of work that other people that are coming out of college just don't have the same desire as we had 5-6 years ago with candidates. So we're going to continue to work with the state and, of course, try to find ways to across the state of Oregon through our partners to try to change that mentality and try to get more qualified candidates to move forward. And then with that, also additional staffing, the supplemental grant with Polk County on the marijuana market enforcement grant. We had applied for some additional funding. They funded about half of what it was that we asked for, which we expected. And so with that, it brings us to a total of roughly $700,000 just for our county over the next 2 years to continue that enforcement. He'll allow us to utilize a second detective on the team and some additional tactical equipment for responding to these cases. Just some general overview for the patrol side, and I'm going to start doing this a little bit more than what we've traditionally done, just because I think it's a good highlight on numbers. And so this year, you probably won't be able to gauge because you're gonna be like, well, what's that like from the years prior? But in 21-22, our patrol division fielded 32,736 calls for service. And of that, there was 5,700 traffic stops, and we had 189 DUI arrests in 21-22. And then from those 32,000 plus cases or calls for service, we had just over 5,000 cases that we took a full report on. And as of July 15th, of those cases that we took reports on, 2,178 have resulted in arrests and 90 open investigations and 180 are pending. So what that tells me is we have a pretty good clearance rate, which means that our cases are not just sitting there unsolved and not anything done with them. We're having some sort of clearance and closing of those cases, which is good. For our jail correctional facility. So a lot of you are aware of Senate Bill 48. If you're not aware of Senate Bill 48, that was the statewide attempt to have some sort of pretrial release programs implemented in counties that don't have pretrial release. We already had pretrial release. Unfortunately, with Senate Bill 48, this brought in a whole nother level of criteria when it came to pretrial release. So what we were doing before is this is all thrown out the window. And so now we're following Senate Bill 48 when it comes to releasing. So with that, we've kind of opened up the jail facility to bring in anybody and everybody because pretrial now has very specific release criteria. And we're bringing in additional people that we weren't typically bringing in. We went ahead and opened it up across the county. We resumed double bunking, so which means we can have 2 people in one cell throughout most of the facility. And just to give you a kind of a snapshot, on June 30th, the day before Senate Bill 48 took an effect, our facility count was 88 AICs in custody. Now we're fluctuating between 120 and 130. So we've had a slight increase in population, but not a huge increase. And our capacity is at 255, but we're going to continue to maintain roughly, I think it's a 70% capacity rate. So we're going to try to not fill the facility more than 70%, just to continue with this transition back to full capacity. And with that, some of the things that are going to help with that is that we have some new building, I wouldn't necessarily say renovations, but some modifications of some existing buildings that we've had. We had our evidence facility now that we're being able to fully transition into a full, more secured evidence facility, which allowed us to vacate some space in the below in the courthouse. So we're going to be able to limit the footprint downstairs into one smaller area, free up a little bit of space for some very much needed for county storage of files and stuff. And then we also were able to clean out one of the 2 outdoor rec areas that we have in our facility. So that's been completely cleaned out. The storage connex that used to be there has been removed. And so we're going to be adding a few additional cameras within the facility. And once we can get the roof of that just cycloned over and secured, then we'll have an additional outdoor area for AICs on the other side of our facility. So now we'll have one on both sides of the facility. So that would be a huge operational change. So that's kind of our update for now.
So Sheriff, did you want to maybe touch on the Homeward Bound Pets contract issue? Is that since we voted on that?
I specifically
left it
didn't.
off?
I specifically left dog control off this.
You did
ask
him if you wanted to.
That's the third rail right
Yeah.
there.
You could say
Yeah.
nope.
We can talk about other things if you want.
No, it's no. So yeah, so that, I mean, yeah, so we've entered into a new contract with Homeward Bound. Yeah, obviously that issue is more than just a countywide concern. It's a state issue. Just limited capacity for these rescues of where we can place dogs. I'm not too happy with, I mean, I love dogs. I got my own dog, but I'm not too happy with the statewide philosophy of bringing in all these dogs from other states for a financial gain to adopt out. It creates a lot of issues with local areas. Our Humane Society should be dealing with our local concerns and issues that we have with local dogs that are abandoned and that need placement. And so because of that, it's put a lot of stress on Homeward Bound on being able to place dogs in certain areas. So we did renegotiate the contract. Of course, costs went up significantly. We have maintained the 3 kennel position as opposed to increasing to 5. We were going to go to 5, but then I reached back out to him. I said, well, listen, if you're completely full right now, if I get a contract for 5 and still can't fill it, then why would I have a contract for 5 if I can only put 3 in there?
Okay.
So we will continue to monitor that. We haven't seen a huge issue locally in our community or for the county's perspective that we would continue to need more than 3 on a regular basis. Right now, we're hovering right around that 2 or 3 per day. But we've built in the ability that if we needed to extend and they have the capacity, then we can do an amendment to the contract that allow for us to move back to 5.
Great.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we do have on the agenda for today, the pager system. So did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I
briefly
can
now?
touch on that
Yeah.
real quick if you want.
Sure. Okay.
So as you know, we did a radio assessment a couple years ago. One of the things that they identified was an immediate need would be the radio paging system. So the fire paging is basically part of the radio system, but it's its own entity within the system. And so anytime 911 is called and they need to notify fire, EMS, and all the fire agencies and volunteer departments that they have a call, they need to be able to page them. So back in the old days, and some of the agencies still actually carry the actual pagers on them. When YCOM pushes the button, it activates the entire system and it pages countywide. And then there's specific tones for each entity. So you know if it's a McMinnville call or if it's a West Valley call or if it's a Dayton call. What was happening with that system is that we were continuing having issues with the equipment declining and being outdated and being end of life, and got to the point where now we're having some connectivity issues with some of our responding units where they're not even getting the pages at all. So moving forward, excuse me, the company that had done the assessment had built into that review the cost of what that would look like moving forward. The radio system budget, we had automatically appropriated money in this fiscal year with the anticipation of needing to move forward with that. And then fast forward to the reason why you have it on your agenda now is that since we've gone through that conversation thinking we might be able to do that sometime over this year, we've learned that we've got some critical needs in the fact that some of the equipment has failed to the point where if we don't fix it now, you could have loss of service, which would mean that fire services aren't getting the pages notifying them they have a call to respond to. So what you see in front of you is as a contract with Comms Northwest to start that work, and to what they'll do is they are built into that. There's a communication link that they need to identify and fix in Sheridan with a microwave, which they'll fix that link. And then also replacement of the entire fire paging to basically the current state-of-the-art Tate backbone for paging.
And maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but didn't we budget about 500 for that? And it came in pretty close?
Yeah, we
Okay.
had the original review, they estimated anywhere between 380 to 450.
Oh,
We
okay.
had budgeted 500,
Yeah.
knowing that cost had gone up. And so I believe it came in just under 500.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Any questions for the sheriff?
I was wondering, Sheriff, if you know even anecdotally how the Yamhill County alert system worked for those who were involved in the recent active shooting going on in
And
McMinnville.
McMinnville, yeah, no, thank you. So it worked just from an operational standpoint, it worked the way we wanted it to. Dispatch was able to notify Sergeant Young and said, hey, we need to send out an alert in this area. He was able to go into the system, assist them in setting it up. They were able to send it out pretty quick. I wouldn't say fallout from that, but the learning part to it, which was a benefit, was that a lot of the local citizens realized that that was a benefit that they didn't have because they weren't necessarily signed up for the voluntary side of it. So that got us a lot more people that are signing up for it. What I don't know is if when they sent it out, if they had pushed it through the the automatic alert, which it went to everybody no matter what, or if it was just we're sending it to those people who, based off the phone numbers we have for the area and the voluntary opt-in. But as of right now, I think the city of McMinnville was thankful that they had the ability to, and now they're getting more people signing up for it because of that.
Great, thank you.
Great question.
I did have two questions. So you had talked about the, the new statewide pretrial release and seeing an increase in your census in jail because of that. Do you anticipate, it sounds like you're expecting that you'll just keep going up. Or because you said, well, we were at this level and now we're at this level. I think it was like 85 to 110 or whatever.
Yeah, so part of that is twofold. One, courts are starting to have more trials. So we're starting to get more sentenced inmates back in. Because before under COVID, we were limiting the number of people that we'd actually bring in the facility with the hopes of mitigating exposure to all the AICs and staff. With the new Senate Bill 48 protocol, because there's a list of category 1, 2, and 3s. Ones are you automatically go out the back door. 2s are you go out the back door with some conditions that you aren't supposed to do things. And 3, you are staying. You don't get to go out the back door. So because there are those conditions and there's those category 3s, the judges ultimately by statute have the final say on the release. So we were initially not allowing those people to be brought in at all, but because of the new criteria, we opened up the doors to start allowing more people to come in. So we're just slowly seeing more people coming into the facility.
Right. So it's that combination of the trials plus.
Correct.
Okay.
And our population pre-COVID was typically around 180.
Yeah.
So I see ourselves slowly getting back to where it was pre-COVID.
Okay, great. And then I heard I can't follow everything. And so, I only hear bits and pieces of things that are happening, especially with statewide like rulemaking. But there's the definitions that are going on for statewide standards for misconduct, right? Or conduct for law enforcement. Has that affected you at all and staff? And are you involved in the conversation? And what I wonder about is, will it affect the long-term interest in being a sheriff's deputy?
Yeah, so I refer to that as the arbitration bill, but it's it definitely involves law enforcement. It involves more management and of course a lot of the represented. So the statute basically designated that there was a concern that there was no real common practice across the state or consistency in how discipline was being handled for certain types of misconduct among law enforcement officers. And so because they were not happy with that, they originally wanted to make it so that you would have to have like a disciplinary matrix similar to a sentencing criteria. And if you're here and here, that you go across and boom, there you fall. And that's what you get for your discipline. Some agencies have that. Portland Police Bureau, for example, has a disciplinary matrix already. They originally wanted it so that it would be negotiated with your local union at your next contract. The new Senate bill changed that and they developed a commission. So what has happened now is there's a commission that had law enforcement representatives and labor representatives on there. They came up with their draft recommendations on what that matrix would look like. And so what the final piece that we'll end up having probably sometime in October is going to be an actual matrix. And so then from an arbitration standpoint, if I discipline someone, I have to follow that matrix. And as long as I follow that process and I follow the matrix, then an arbitrator can't come in later and say, well, yeah, they did that, but you shouldn't have done, the discipline was too severe. So for a couple examples, I mean,
I have the examples in my head.
There's
too,
some
already.
very high level ones, but let's say you get in trouble for drinking on the job. The presumptive discipline proposal is termination, 0 tolerance. But if you have mitigating factors that you can apply to that, such as they self-admit that they have a problem or there's other things, then you can go to a lesser level of discipline. So that's the concept, is that they'll have a presumptive discipline, but then if you have mitigating or aggravating factors will play into it. And then the draft rules propose how you apply those mitigating factors, when you have to apply them. It's going to get very complicated, but it will take a little bit of the decision authority out of our hands. But I think what it'll do is it will reinforce from a management perspective that we take certain things and violations in our job very serious. And if you do that, we discipline you for it.
That's gonna hold.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that holding is. I realize there's other people involved in this one too, but
No,
thank you. That was
I
very
was just
helpful.
gonna highlight, that we're currently at the bargaining table
Yep.
with Teamsters, what represents the deputies in Tim's office. So I just, so we're still having discussions around this.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff.
All right.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Okay.
You never know. We might have some questions
We're not
about
gonna
other
talk any
things.
More about mushrooms. Even in the land use hearing.
Okay, item G is a work session. We have no work sessions today. And item H is a consent agenda.
Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented. I beat you to it, Chair.
So there's a motion on the table from Commissioner Kula. I did want to pull, however, item H2. This is approval of amendment number 2 to the lease agreement between Yamhill County and TDJC LLC, Board Order 17-170, increasing the rent to the amount of $13,898.41 per month with annual 10% increases retroactive to July 1st, 2022. I did have clarification that this was regarding the structure on Baker Street. The name of it is escaping me.
Well, Aspen,
As
well,
far as process,
Oh.
a commissioner can request
Oh,
that
yeah.
get removed, that would be removed, and then you
We
can
can
restate the
discuss it.
You wanna vote on
motion
the rest of
with
it
that.
first?
And
Yeah.
so that way you can address the consent agenda and then
Okay.
you could take up that topic.
Yeah, I move that we approve section H, removing H2 and moving it to other business.
Okay. Sounds good. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. So the consent agenda items H1, 3, and 4 have been approved. So we can move that down to, well, we'll just move it down to item J4. So, don't forget. Okay. So item I is old business. We have nothing under old business. Item J, other business. J1 is consideration to authorize Yamhill County Health and Human Services to submit an application for problem gambling services referral pathways / outreach funding administered by the Oregon Health Authority. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Sterrett moves approval. Is there further discussion?
No, sure.
No? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. J2, consideration of approval in the matter of authorizing the emergency purchase of emergency paging communications system installation and approving the contract. And Commissioners, I will move approval of item J2. Is there further discussion?
Nope.
No.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. J3, consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Willamina School District for behavioral health counseling services in the not to exceed amount of $64,199.88 effective September 2022 through May of 2023. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'd move approval.
Okay, Commissioner Sterrett moves approval. Is there further discussion?
No, Chair.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, and so we have the new item J4, which is approval of amendment number 2 to the lease agreement between Yamhill County and TDJC LLC, Board Order 17-170, increasing the rent to the amount of $13,898.41 per month with annual 10% increases retroactive to July 1st of 2022. And as I was saying, this is the property on Baker Street that houses some of our mental health and drug clients. Very important work. My concern is the justification for the 10% every single year for 5 years. That is a very steep increase. We were paying, Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first agreement was started around $12,000 a month with a 2% annual increase for 5 years. This is 10% per year for 5 years. So I'd like to get a little bit more information and clarification on what is justifying the rental increase, because that's a huge jump. So I'm
I
not sure.
reached out to Director Manfred, who wasn't available due to other meeting commitments to
Okay.
join this morning. And the response that I got during the discussions that they had with renewal on this is Haworth wasn't able, they were having issues with getting refinancing through the bank without doing an increase with the agreements. And so that was part of the reason, again, with, you know, I think we're seeing it across the board with a lot of increases with rent that's occurring. And, you know, so again, that was the brief response that I had from Lindsay. So.
Okay.
I would just recommend that we remove this because originally, I mean, if it was, and thank you for pointing this out, because it was 2%. And we had a sort of, when we started this project, it was five-year master lease with the Aspen and the Bakerfield projects, which took us off, you know, we were off the hook for having to make the initial investment. But it was 2% a year, 5 years. And then we had a really quick out. Christian, I don't remember what it was. Was it 60 days, 90 days? So that it was really to our advantage. But thank you, Chair, for pointing this out. That's significant. And I think based on our contract, we might have some room in terms of renegotiating this. But
That's what I mean. I respect the fact that Haworth is playing a critical role in housing these individuals and obviously partnered with the county. I'm just curious if there's room for negotiation, because I mean, that's a lot of money. And I don't know that in market conditions, we're seeing 10% a year. I don't think that
was the thing that I was thinking about. But yet balancing that against the knowledge that these properties could go onto the market, you know, as soon as they decide that they don't want to go negotiate with us. But I think that having a further conversation about that 10 for 5 is worthy. I think we should have it.
Okay. And Christian, I think you said there's 16 units. Is that right? Okay.
Right.
Okay. And
Because that's if we're not having the income for it, then.
or
So-
if we just don't want.
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I just mean the shorter version is
Oh, yeah, yeah.
like we literally are just. paying
So
out
I
of
can be
county
clear because
resources.
you know, before, you know, we go down some paths, so I'm kind of clear of where we're at.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing correctly, the board's not. Are you wanting to table this and move this to old business, or are the direction is I need to go back to HHS and have a follow-up discussion and then bring this back for consideration?
My proposal would be to table it and come back next week when we have some more details.
Okay.
And I don't know that negotiations could happen in a week, but if
No.
not, then we can move it.
But at least, you know, I can have the conversations with Lindsay and Jason. And I'm not sure who was the lead on working on these negotiations, but they could come back and have a conversation.
I think Silas was working on this when we first put the contract together, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm
Oh.
talking about the amendment and
Oh,
renewal. I
now.
wasn't going to go back to
Oh.
the beginning.
Okay.
No. Silas isn't with, you know, Yamhill County anymore.
We can call him up and ask him.
But Lindsay
may be out of
was here
self-image.
as well, and I know she's familiar with this project and all of the various housing projects that we do have those partnerships with throughout the county.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so Christian or Ken, what happens in the meantime? Are we still paying the same, because this is retroactive to July 1st? Are we just kind of continuing? Are we?
I'm sure we're probably went into a month until renewal. of the new
I don't know the
contract,
details. I would
so.
need to talk to to Lindsay or Jason as well to see what happened. The original 5-year term was through June 30th. There was an option for an additional extension for 5 years. There was nothing in the original lease about a rent increase other than the 2% annually. So I suspect the 10% was part of exercising that 5-year extension, and then as agreed between the parties, this
An amendment
additional
to the rent.
amendment increase. But we can find more out about where we're at. I'm assuming that, we still have tenants there and we're still operating under the existing lease.
Right. And we cover all of the rent for each tenant, all 16 units.
Again,
We don't know.
probably,
Okay.
that's a question for Lindsay. If there's
Yeah.
questions about the program elements of that, that
Okay.
would be something that Lindsay
Yeah.
could talk
Well,
about.
let's make sure that we don't wait on it too long, or just that's my caution.
Next week.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have
Yeah,
a
I
This
mean,
week
if
is
we're
good.
not paying, I don't know what the situation is, but I'd like to know what the human impact it is if we pull out of this contract. Because
Huge.
Well, I don't think we
Significant.
wanna go
I
there.
would
Well,
just, yeah.
No, but in all
wanna go there.
in all seriousness, if we are covering the rent for these individuals, there are clients, where are they going to
They're
go?
not.
Exactly.
How is
Right.
that going to work? That is an important part of this. So,
Totally.
Okay.
I don't think I don't even think that piece is negotiable. I think we need to just come to an agreement with Troy because he's been really great working with us, but I don't think we want to even consider the impact of, because there is no next
Yeah,
step.
exactly.
And the Aspen and the Baker properties, they're specific clients that are getting a lot of supports. And for us to just say, oh, we're not going to do this anymore. So I would never advocate for us to I would just like, could we get more information? And,
Yeah.
Right.
as you
Yeah,
brought it
is
up,
this
and
a
I thank you for
reasonable
doing it.
increase that matches things and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that 6-month term was included in there. Didn't want to feel obliged beyond maybe a time frame that we knew we were going to have funding, but have it be a long enough time period that alternatives could be reached for where these individuals would go. That when I remember having those discussions, it would take at least that long, if not longer, to figure out where
Yeah.
these clients would be housed.
Yeah. I echo your shaking of the head. So
Yeah.
I just, with that kind of increase, though, I think we do need to justify why it's happening. So if it, are there major capital improvements? Are there huge insurance increases? What's happened where because the memo says not all of the increased amount is included in the HHS budget, although they have sufficient authority. So there's just some questions that I think we need to get answered.
And, okay.
Okay, so we will table that for
the
the
18th?
18th, August
because it's
18th.
the day before the 19th.
Yeah.
Day for the 19th, that's exactly right, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're on a roll.
Okay, I believe that's all of our agenda
That's
for
right.
our public hearing. Do we need to take a 5-minute break before the public hearing? Everybody?
I'm okay.
Everybody okay?
Maybe a 3-minute break.
Okay, we'll take a 3-minute break
Okay.
and come back at 12:50. Is that somebody laughing online? Okay, ready to go?
There you go.
Okay, we're gonna reassemble, readjourn. The Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal and informal session, August 11th. It is 12:51. And we're picking up at agenda item K, which is our public hearing. So I'm gonna open the public hearing. This is an appeal of the planning director's approval of docket number C-28-21, a conditional use request to operate a 9 guest room bed and breakfast facility as a home occupation. The applicant is Kellen Lancaster for 15660 Ground LLC. The appellant is Friends of Yamhill County, and this has been continued from July 14th of 2022 at the point of staff recommendation. So we will pick up, and we have received the testimony that's come in over the past 3 weeks, I think it was. And so we will pick up at staff recommendation. Lance, welcome.
Based on the testimony, the applicant has successfully demonstrated the operated as a home occupation. Staff recommends approval of the 18th edition.
Sure, just because it's been a while, so let's why don't we go through those. Thank you.
Condition number 1, the bed and breakfast is located at 160 Northwest Red Shop Lane, Carlton, on tax lot 3523-02400. Maximum of 9 guest rooms. Condition number 2, food service shall be limited to 1 morning meal for the guests. Condition number 3, operation of the bed and breakfast personal of the applicant, property owner, 15660 Ground LLC, and does not run with the land. Any subsequent owner who would like to continue operating the bed and breakfast must receive land use approval for the occupation. Condition number 4, single family dwelling located on tax lot 35-02400 shall be readdressed from 16020 Northwest Red Shop Lane to the new address of 15250 Northwest Kansas Creek Road prior to operation of the bed and breakfast. Condition number 5, operation of the bed and breakfast shall be managed by a full-time resident dwelling located on tax lot 3522-02400. Condition number 6, prior to the operation of the bed and breakfast, the name or names and contact numbers for the resident shall be provided to the planning director, and its contact information shall be updated as needed if the person employed for changes. Condition number 7, prior to operation of the bed and breakfast, driveway access and water supply shall be inspected by the fire department. Condition number 8, the use shall employ no more than 5 full or part-time employees. Condition number 9, prior to operation of the bed and breakfast, the landowner shall sign an affidavit acknowledging the following declaratory statement and recorded in the deed and mortgage records of Yamhill County, which is as follows. The subject property is located in an area designated by the Yamhill County for agricultural forest. It is county policy to protect agricultural and forest operations within land uses in such designated areas. Accepted agricultural and forest practices in this area may create inconveniences to the owner or occupants of property. However, Yamhill County does not consider it the agricultural or timber operator's responsibility to modify accepted practices to accommodate the owner or occupants of the property, with the exception of such operators' violation of state law. Condition number 10, prior to operation of the home occupation, the applicant shall obtain an inspection and approval, also known as an authorization notice, from the county sanitary. Condition number 11, prior to operation of the home occupation, the applicant shall obtain all building department. Condition number 12, prior to operation of the bed and breakfast, the water shall be tested initially for nitrate and arsenic with quarterly bacteria tests thereafter, and determined to be safe for public consumption by the public department. Results of the test shall be submitted to the Yamhill County Planning Department. Condition 13, use is limited to the operation of a 9 guest and bed and breakfast from the existing single family dwelling Agritourism or other celebratory events on the property require additional land use approval. Condition 14, no outside evidence of the home occupation shall be visible except for a sign not to exceed 24 square feet, which is subject to permit and land use approval pursuant to section 1006 of the Animal County zoning ordinance. Condition number 15, an area to provide a maximum of 1 parking space per guest room and 1 parking space for each employee on maximum working shift shall be maintained. There shall be no parking along the northeast west Panther Creek Road or northwest Red Shop Lane right of way. Condition 16, this approval is valid for 1 year following the date of final approval and shall expire at that time unless. Condition number 7, a review of the bed and breakfast operation shall be required 2 years following the date of final approval. The operation may be renewed if it continues to comply with requirements of section 1004.01 of the Animal County zoning ordinance and the conditions of proof. He may be charged for renewal of the permit. And condition 18, modification of any of the above conditions requires approval under section 1202.05 of the Animal County zoning ordinance. Violation of any of the above conditions may result in revocation of the conditional use permit for the process detailed in section 1202.07, 12. And that is.
Thank you. Thank you, Lance. Okay, that concludes the staff recommendations. So I will close the hearing and open this up for deliberation. Commissioners, anyone want to take the lead?
Well,
Thoughts?
I guess I would appreciate that both. I guess for me, this is a good example of how goal 1 is public comment and public input and involvement, because as you recall, the applicant did change how they were doing things based upon the concerns of neighbors and friends of Yamhill County. So I appreciate that. I feel like it's a good example of that. I also appreciated that Garrett Stevens, who's on, was willing to go back to traffic engineers and really look at the state of the roads to make sure that they were not so heavily impacted as to impede farm and forest traffic in the area. And I realized that forest traffic isn't in the study area, so therefore it's not an impacted thing that we can consider, but it's still something we have to consider, is that there's forest traffic that comes down Panther Creek Road and up it. Though the one thing that kind of there's a little bit of a nagging around is that Pam Kindle, the neighbor, expressed that there's a lot of traffic on Red Shot Lane that seems to be associated with the property, and of course there's construction, and recognize that, and there aren't any guests, and the guests will be going via the new driveway access. I'm wondering whether actually imposing the condition that all B&B related traffic, since this is something that we can say is all B&B related traffic goes on the driveway except for emergency vehicles that can still use Red Shot Lane, as a way of really saying to neighbors, hey, this isn't going to impact you. It'll be in theory less impact than when traffic is on the road now. And it feels like that's not going to dramatically inhibit the work and the activities, the business activities of the B&B. So that's the one, it's a minor change, but it feels like it's a way of really acknowledging that the neighbors have these real concerns that aren't necessarily going to be changed once the driveway is open.
My understanding was that what I would call the back end driveway was going to be limited to minimal staff and potentially owners of the property. So I'm not clear on what you're suggesting, because it was my understanding that the traffic for the B&B would come off of the road.
Yeah, the
directly.
language that the applicant uses is the Red Shot Lane will only be used for occasional service vehicles and for alternative emergency access. And given the testimony that we've received, occasional service vehicles, it sounds like it's potentially could be very significant. So because we have the option to impose that condition, that's, I don't think onerous, but it acknowledges that there are impacted neighbors.
To that, and while we're talking about that,
Mhm.
the traffic count data, I think we need to make some, we need to be reminded that the vehicles that were counted in this were not vehicles that were going to the B&B. Can you remind us of what that, because that shows up in section 1004-01J. And it just talks about the let's not assume that we're putting those two together.
Commissioner, are you asking about the traffic count from the applicant and how the numbers that they came up with, or?
Well, because I think there were some assumptions made that we had traffic issues and that we could then, say, all right, it's related to this when it doesn't appear that could be the case.
Yeah, and I think that came up as well with noting the increase in humans that she can check on. And I would say that and the traffic predate the proposed bed and breakfast. There's construction activities occurring on the applicant's lot or maybe surrounding area, but those are unrelated to the proposed bed and breakfast. The dwelling isn't constructed yet; they don't have occupancy, so there's no traffic generated by the bed and breakfast. That's why.
Right.
And we have process applications that the property owner wasn't prepared to do before they operated a bed and breakfast. If there had been a traffic study, then we do that a little bit. But with this, it's status quo conditions. More bed and breakfast.
Right.
Right,
Thank you.
baseline, yeah.
So Commissioner Coyle, I'm trying to, in reality, how would you craft that additional?
Yeah, so the condition, I mean, right now in the I don't believe it's a condition right now that only that it'll be just a guest, right? There isn't a condition. I didn't hear it, but
Yeah, so the condition.
It's not coming on.
Microphone.
That's right. There is no condition that. Thank you. So the condition right now is that the dwelling that's being constructed will be served by Panther Creek Road. It's going to be readdressed to that. And I think the rationale behind that is that a lot of folks who are going to be visiting the site are going to be potentially using a GPS or some other software to guide them there.
Yeah.
And that by having it addressed to the Panther Creek Road, it'll direct them that route and avoid Red Shot Lane. If we wanted to add a condition, if the board wants us to add a condition that states that guests can only use that access, we're happy to do that. And the challenge might be, how do we enforce that? And how do we tell who is using the access and for what purpose?
Right.
But, it's an engaged community up there. There's a lot of folks keeping an eye on the property and getting back to your goal one statement. I think that's what helps us do our job, is by having citizen engagement. So I'm happy to work on crafting a condition to that effect, but just thinking about how we would enforce it.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that ultimately, if we don't have a condition, then it really is just well, the applicant said they'll do it, and then neighbors drop their opposition. But if we don't have a condition in the record, it's there's nothing that holds them to it, right? Except for the B&B review at the 2-year mark, right?
Well, it's not uncommon for a business to have a separate, delivery service access point to their business. I mean, I'm almost wondering if it makes it worse if you have a sign at Panther Creek that says guests go this way, everybody else goes this way, right?
Mhm.
You're most inviting more traffic.
On the
on
service.
On Red Shot Lane, yeah. I don't know. It didn't, you know, based on what I read, it didn't seem like there would be a huge amount of traffic using Red Shot Lane. It's restricted to the people who know it's there, which is the owners, and potentially some type of service. So food service, laundry service, whatever they're using for
Mhm.
operating the business.
Right.
Once construction's done, you're not going to have a huge influx of traffic there.
Yeah. So you think that, so the applicant listens to opposition from neighbors and puts in a driveway. You think that that's enough for, without imposing a condition?
Well, it's my
That they have to use it.
understanding that there would be a sign there at the driveway off Panther Creek that would indicate this is,
I didn't think
this
that
is where
there
it
was
is.
a plan for a sign. I don't think there is a plan in the,
I thought we talked
in
about that.
the application. They said that they're not gonna have a sign. It
Mm.
does say in the application you can have a sign.
Okay, because I thought there was going to be one. So if there was going to be one, then it was sort of like it wasn't going to be a problem because it would just be really clear.
Mm.
Is there a provision for
My
that?
understanding is that no.
There's no condition of approval for that. But I would strongly recommend, with the absence of a condition, I would strongly recommend that the property owner work with Public Works to put directional signs in, which we can do without going through the sign ordinance.
Right.
I mean, if they wanted to have something that advertised their business, then they
Because
could
the little
propose
ones
that.
don't require the sign
Yeah,
ordinance.
if it's directional, then it doesn't require anything. And we've had other businesses and even new subdivisions direct traffic a certain way for certain addresses, and I would strongly recommend that the property owner do that. And perhaps that could be a condition of approval that addresses the concern that folks may find their way to Red Shot Lane either accidentally or miss that first driveway and be like, oh, I can get in through here. And potentially that requiring a directional sign be put up might address Commissioner
I think I
Kula's
would be
concern.
more comfortable with not requiring a condition of approval that restricts them to the use if there's a way of identifying it.
Mhm.
But how do you do that? You can strongly recommend, but what does that actually mean?
Right. And if the condition of approval might then necessitate that they work with Public Works to have that directional sign put in. And so that might be one that we add to this list.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay. And I will say that on the application, yes, acknowledge that it's an unusual house that doesn't meet some traditional definitions. And I also want to acknowledge that it meets, as I read it, as I'm listening to staff, it meets the requirements of the process.
Right, okay.
So I wanted to make sure that, because I wanted to make sure that my concerns were addressed, but I also want to acknowledge that I've heard a lot of testimony and it does still appear to meet the conditions.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, I would move approval of the recommendation of the Planning Commission and denying the appeal of docket number C 2821.
Okay, Commissioner Starrett moves approval. And I do want to just add though, because I feel like there's a lot of discomfort around us approving these. And it may be just because of how bed and breakfasts have morphed over time, right? It used to be a house where a family lived and you might have a couple extra bedrooms. And now we're talking about, you know, innkeepers with 9 bedrooms, and it really, it's very different in reality as to what is actually allowed as a conditional use. Perhaps that's a conversation that we continue to have in terms of the impact on our rural areas in the county.
Yeah.
I spoke to somebody who's been involved with the land use for a while, and the comment was, yeah, they're allowed, but there's, you know, if there's a proliferation of these, it's obviously a concern, and they would be better suited perhaps in some flex zones around cities, right? So that's not anything that we have control over, but that was the comment is, you know, they would be better suited in a proximity to a city that's, not out in the middle of nowhere. So I just want to add that commentary because I do, this plan is not what I would consider a traditional bed and breakfast. It's not, it doesn't look like it, it doesn't feel like it, but that's what we have. So,
Yeah,
um,
it meets the criteria.
yeah, it's the criteria.
Yeah.
So,
But I
um,
appreciate your comments. I think that for me, the thing that would elevate it to, do we ask planning commission and staff to really like dig into what refining we can do or dropping the maximum number of rooms is if we're hearing consistently from neighbors, wells are going dry or septic systems are leaking or the roads are clogged. If we were hearing those on a regular basis, then I think it would behoove us to see what we can do to minimize that impact.
And other counties, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Friday, that there is the option for the board to issue a moratorium on these particular, is that something that's been done in other counties, or I misunderstand that? Or limit the number?
We can certainly limit the number of bedrooms on a bed and breakfast, or even, eliminate it as an option. But I don't know a way to do a moratorium on them. It's just, it would be a matter of changing our code and deciding what is appropriate as far as staying in the farm zone.
And other counties have sort of used the nuclear option. Did I misunderstand that as well?
I haven't researched that question. Whenever I hear moratorium, usually that's something that is used for like a city that has run out of water. And so they put down a moratorium for, and I think you're allowed only a couple of years to do it so that you have a time to plan to come up with another source of water. It doesn't really stop the development in the city forever. It stalls it for a while while you're coming up with a plan. But if you're wanting to modify or stop these, narrow them down, change them in some other way, you probably would want to look at your code and decide what's appropriate in the code. We had it as 5 rooms years ago. We went up to 9, and the real estate and the interest in development today is a lot different than it was when we changed it.
Thank you. I lost my train of thought. Oh, I was thinking of the drawbridge. Your drawbridge.
Drawbridge mentality. I have
Mentality, yeah.
mine now. You're gonna have to figure out how to get yours.
Yeah, and it's just really
Yeah.
uncomfortable to be in that position where you might have to say no to some people. And Clatsop, I think it's Clatsop County that's going through this right now with their short-term rentals where
Lincoln County,
Is it
just
Lincoln
had
County?
Luba deny the appeal.
Okay. Which is the same type of situation, right? If you've had one for 20 years, you would essentially be grandfathered in, and then anybody wanting to invest or come in and, create a new business for their family, sorry.
And
Yeah.
I think it's important, like, to come back to that, like, impacts. Is it impacting forests nearby and their activities? Is it impacting farmers nearby? And is it impacting rural residents because of their water systems too? That's its own true impact that we can consider and I haven't heard that. But if we're hearing that on a consistent basis, we should take action, in my view.
And people have been.
Even if it's just restricting the scale for the future. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, but I think we have heard over and over again, and we've even seen personally that wells, are dropping and that's changed. That's changed, over the years prior to any of these larger development, larger projects.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I'll tell you about my bed and breakfast story later. Okay, so Commissioner Starrett has a motion to uphold the staff recommendation and deny the appeal. Is there any further discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes.
And so since Jody is not here, I presume that'll mean that we'll come back and be ready next week.
They're so mean.
I was gonna say, let's do 3 weeks. That with findings for adoption.
Thank you.
Do you read? I can't remember. Do I just close the hearing?
It's closed.
It's closed. Okay. Okay.
Made a decision.
So that brings us back to our formal session, and we are picking up at item L, which is announcements. Commissioners, any announcements for this week?
One short one. I just wanted to give you a heads up that Chair Hagerberg from Parkway and I worked through like a positional letter on a 3 Mile Lane plan that is, I think, very respectful and also raises concerns that need to be raised. And it will be available to you as soon as he's done. He promised it would be done by Friday.
Okay,
So
Great.
Yeah.
so that'll be Parkway's kind of contribution to the conversation.
Thank you.
So would it be appropriate to hear that on the 25th after Heather Richards and Councilor Chenoweth come?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we can have him
Yeah.
talk about that after.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was endeavoring to keep our Parkway committee together with unanimity around finishing the bypass and the funding around that,
Right.
while also acknowledging that we need to be, that we should be respectful of cities' need to work on projects within their community. So it says like, land use is your thing, and we want to be cautious about overloading a system that we may have to find funding for.
Good point. Thank you.
So that's
Okay. So I think we have that on as a work session on the 25th. It's at the beginning of the
yeah.
session. So
Yes.
Okay.
And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was we went over the tolling and low-income Oregonians work that ODOT's been doing. I'll make sure you actually get the presentation on that. My proposal or my feedback was make sure that people aren't overly burdened by the cost of it.
Did
That
they
was just
actually disclose what the rate's going to be?
No, they didn't. They talked about like what are the possible ways to reduce the impact to low-income Oregonians who are driving through that area. And it expands the area that will be told expands over time. So, but they did have a sense of like, if it was something like if you give every low-income person who might drive through the area no charge, then it reduces the revenue by 1% and it increases congestion by 2%. I was like, I'm okay with that. If people from our community are moving through there without getting a cost burden out of it. But we provided him with feedback on it. So they're still working on it. It was the like, Harry, what do you think of this?
Right.
It didn't get blown out of the water.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a lot of commuters.
Yeah.
And the stats that we've seen is upwards of $85 per driver per month. And if you have a family of 3 drivers, that's
Yeah,
a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's not just about the tolls, it's about the impact on the neighborhoods around it. People.
So that's actually what I
diverting.
mentioned. Yeah, thank you for, sorry.
So
I am, but I've, when I follow a GPS through the Portland area, it's taking me in neighborhoods now.
Right.
And so I said, like, please, let's be aware of the fact that there are going to be neighborhoods dramatically impacted by it. So
I just
thank
think
you for
it's going to
mentioning
be a shock. I mean, nobody here is really used to tolls unless you've been to California. And the only times I've paid tolls in California is when I've had an expressway that actually took me somewhere faster.
Yeah.
So I just think people are going to be in shock over this if it rolls out, hopefully.
Yeah.
it doesn't, but-
And so the only other thing you were going to.
No, I was just going to say, I grew up in New York, and tolls were just a way of life. And I would go across this one particular bridge to go to school, and it was $7. At first it was 25 cents, then it was 75, then it went up to $7. So it was really a big deal to just go a few miles from my house. And I think we have to remember that those tolls are not going to be static.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, just when we think about the tolling is really the basis for the bonding. It's not, it's in and of itself, it's the thing that'll just pay back the bonding. So I think we all need to get it really right.
And they tell us it's going to end when we've paid those debts, but guess what?
Yeah.
They don't.
Right.
Right.
So the other,
Yeah.
because I think it's important, the only other thing that we talked about at MWAC that I really wanted to communicate to you is that the Federal Highway Administration, for lack of a better, I think I may be wrong, is doing a public lands access need assessment. So they're asking everybody, as many people as they can, to let them know about particular pieces of public land that have either poor access or the county road or the state highway or the city road is falling down that they may need to fund the improvements to. So if there's something that rings a bell, the person who's the lead on that, I are going to get together later to kind of talk about some of the projects that the county is working on, like
Okay.
Meadow Lake Road, for example.
Right. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
That's it.
I have a fair update recap. It was a record-breaking year. We had almost 42,000 people come to the fair. The food vendors, they saw a 20% increase in their sales. And the carnival had the largest gross sales for rides that they've ever had. They had $181,000. And a lot of that was my son buying a pass every night. Didn't realize how expensive that was.
Yeah, no kidding.
The Golden Circle concerts sold out every night for 4 nights. And we were talking about the auction earlier, the 4-H auction. I think it brought in over $800,000. So just remarkable record-breaking year. And considering COVID, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
I do want to thank our team, Gary Wirtz and Lacey Carroll and Grace Adams. They were phenomenal. We had some very dedicated volunteers showing up and they were there the whole time. Olaf Security did a great job. And then obviously our fair board directors, I saw every single one of them. Leslie, Dean, Greg, John, and Dania. They were great. We were all checking restrooms and picking up garbage and doing what we could. It was just very busy the whole time. So, but a successful year. So I'm very excited for them. And Kit, I want to thank you too, because your whole family showed up to volunteer and you were in the ticket booth and that was great. It's great to see that. So.
Appreciate that.
Awesome.
Just want to say we have some good news that the Housing Authority received $11.25 million from OHCS for Stratus Village. So at this point, they're projected to be fully funded on a $64 million project. We're waiting on the $7 million. We have an MOU out with the tribe. And then they're just looking for partners to purchase some tax credits. Just an update on the whole situation. We've heard some concerns about one of the properties, Victoria Square. And the Housing Authority has assured me that they're taking these very seriously. So they brought in rural development to do inspections. They're doing air quality tests for mold. They've had electricians out there and they're basically just making sure that if the tenants have concerns are being addressed. The other thing is regarding the air conditioners. At this point, people can apply to the CCO for flexible funds for medical needs if they have a need for an air conditioner, and also through YCAP, they're being shown how to apply. So they're very proactive in this, and I want to just thank them for all the work they're doing out there.
That's good updates. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very quick response too on Victoria Square.
Yeah.
In terms of getting them out there to check.
That's right.
and
And
make
that's who they're responsible
Yeah.
to for that property, not HUD, but the rural development.
Right.
Okay.
And then just the other thing is, yesterday at a meeting with AOC, HHS, we're looking for some kind of consensus with framework for indemnification for counties regarding our aid and assist population, and looking at a variety of ways of getting that addressed legislatively, because otherwise we do have some risk exposure.
That's great. Thank you for working on that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any further announcements?
Oh, happy birthday, Chair.
Oh yeah, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
It's good that you said it. 'Cause we're-
Happy birthday. That wasn't my announcement. Happy birthday. Ken and I were
Perfect.
talking about the date to come back with the findings. 3 weeks is actually September 1st, which is the date the board had talked about not having a formal session. So if that's in fact going to occur, then we would propose to bring the findings back on the following Thursday, which would be the 8th of September. So that would be 4 weeks, not 3. If that works.
We're assuming that's okay with them. Okay.
Or 2, we could always go the other way.
We could go the other way.
Is Jody still on?
No.
She won't be back. Yeah, she gets back on Wednesday. I would say if 4 weeks works for the applicant and for everyone, that would be great.
They applied in like October, so.
Yeah,
I
really.
mean. Okay,
Okay, that was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
okay. If
Lance and
there's
Ken.
nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal and informal session for August 11th. It is 1:26.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.